Thank you everyone for joining so promptly. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Thank you everyone for joining. We'll get started in just about 1 minute. Thanks for your patience. Thanks everyone for joining on time. We'll get started in very shortly. Just waiting for a few more participants to trickle in. Welcome everyone to the 4th topical workshop related to advancing 30 by 30. Today's workshop focuses on advancing 30 by 30 and conservation of lands. It features an advisory panel presentation followed by an opportunity for public input. My name is Debbie Schechter and I'll be facilitating today's workshop. We'd like to start with some housekeeping items and some tips for a successful workshop. Want to let everyone know that the workshop will be recorded for further viewing and will be posted on the website www.californianature.ca.gov. We're also streaming the workshop live on the California Natural Resources Agency's YouTube page. The meeting is also being interpreted in Spanish. In order to access the audio channel for Spanish, you'll need to click the interpretation button, which is the globe icon in the Zoom taskbar, and that button will appear after these instructions. We'll repeat the instructions in Spanish, and then you'll be able to join the Spanish audio channel. So I'll invite our interpreter, Victor Hernandez, to repeat the instructions in Spanish.
Thank you, Debbie. Muy buenas tardes. Bienvenidos a todos. Hoy le queremos dejar saber que esta reunión tendrá interpretación al español. Para poder acceder al canal de audio, habrá un icono de globo, es decir, un icono del mundo que aparecerá en su barra de tareas en la plataforma esta de Zoom. Usted tendrá que hacer clic en el botón de interpretación y después, a continuación, aparecerá un menú y luego usted podrá seleccionar su idioma. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor. Closed captioning is also available. If you'd like to use this option, you can click the closed caption icon in the Zoom taskbar and then select subtitles to view the subtitles on the screen, or you can select live transcript to see the full transcript. During the workshop, participants will be muted and off camera until the public input portion, and then we'll unmute you at that point. If you need technical assistance, please use the chat button in the Zoom taskbar, and we're reserving the chat only for technical assistance. If you're on the phone and you need technical assistance, please dial *9. We'll also share relevant links through the chat feature during the course of the workshop. During the panel presentation, you may use the Q&A function to send in your typed questions. We'll ask the panel to address a few clarifying questions at the end of their presentation, but we will only have time for a few questions at that point. We have many people participating in today's workshop, and we want to make sure it's as productive as possible for everyone. So as we move through the workshop, we ask you to please follow these guidelines. Please be respectful to each other and the workshop agenda and objectives. Threatening, profane, or other inappropriate language is not allowed, and disruptive participants will be removed from the workshop. So we invite your cooperation in making sure that this is a productive meeting for everyone. Facilitating the public input portion of the workshop with me today is my co-facilitator, Cece Boo, and joining us from the California Natural Resources Agency is Jennifer Norris, the Deputy Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitat. Now I'd like to hand it over to Jennifer to lead us in a tribal acknowledgement.
Thanks so much, Debbie. And thank you everyone for being here. I'd like to take some time to acknowledge California Native American tribes and people before we move forward in our discussion of advancing 30 by 30 and conservation of lands. The lands and waters of California are the ancestral lands and waters of over 100 California Native American tribes, and they contain significant cultural and ecological heritage and importance. The history of California is rich in heritage, culture, and tradition. This history is also fraught with historical wrongs, tolerated, encouraged, subsidized, and committed by state actors against California Native Americans. Despite these instances of violence, maltreatment, and neglect, California Native Americans have persisted, carried on cultural and linguistic traditions, and stewarded and protected this land. Acknowledging this place as the home of California Native American peoples since time immemorial is just a small step we can take in the spirit of truth and healing. We have a lot more work to do to implement meaningful reparative change. And I encourage each of you, as you engage in this workshop and as you go out into the world, to elevate California Native governments, communities, peoples, and priorities into your work, as we will in ours. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. And now back to Debbie.
Thanks, Jennifer. The objectives of today's workshop are to explore strategies that California can pursue to conserve 30% of California's lands by 2030 in a way that's meaningful, equitable, and measurable. Also to present the advisory panel findings and recommendations, and finally, to hear from you about your priorities. We've inserted a link in the chat to an agenda that you can follow for today's workshop. First, we'll hear a brief update related to the Pathways to 30 by 30 document. We'll receive a presentation from the advisory panel, followed by a brief question and answer session. After that, we'll take a short break, and then we'll begin hearing public input from pre-registered participants. Now, Jennifer, back to you.
So I'm going to provide a quick overview of the executive order and how we got to this advancing 30 by 30 effort. So in October 2020, Governor Newsom advanced Executive Order N8220, enlisting California's vast network of natural and working lands, forests, rangelands, farms, wetlands, coasts, deserts, and urban spaces in the fight against climate change, and elevating biodiversity protection as a state priority. Through this executive order, the state committed to the goal of conserving 30% of California's lands and coastal waters by 2030. The The Resources Agency is developing a Pathways to 30 by 30 document to identify strategies to achieve these results. So the executive order underscores California's commitment to proactively protect species in decline and leverage actions from the environment to protect biodiversity and reduce the harmful effects of climate change. Our goal is to conserve 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030, and to do so in a manner that protects biodiversity, combats climate change, increases access to nature, while safeguarding our economic sustainability and food supply. So as I've said, we're working on our Pathways to 30 by 30 document, which we will deliver in February of 2022. This document will identify challenges, opportunities, and strategies to achieve our goal. And the document is intended to set us on the path to successful implementation. We're also developing the CA Nature Geographic Information System in partnership with ESRI, which will be a publicly accessible suite of interactive mapping and visualization tools. CA Nature will bring together biodiversity, climate, and access data into one publicly accessible shared platform. It will be a tool we can all use to identify places across California where we have the opportunity to achieve our biodiversity, climate, and equity goals. We're hard at work on these deliverables, but I can't emphasize enough the importance of public participation. It is truly key to the development of the Pathways document and CA Nature. We can't do this without your input and expertise. And Debbie's going to talk more about opportunities to be engaged in this important work. Debbie?
Thanks, Jen. Today's topical workshop builds on several previous public engagement milestones, which are shown on the next slide. Thank you. Formal consultation with California Native American tribes and continued tribal engagement activities are ongoing. There's ongoing engagement with priority communities and stakeholders. We held nine regional workshops engaging 2,500 stakeholders across California, and several topical workshops, including tonight's, aim to address key topics and questions and to gather your input. We're looking for specific ideas on types of programs that should be included and expanded on, and referrals to any organizations doing relevant work to propel us closer to the goals for 30 by 30 and advancing nature-based solutions. We'd like to hear from as many participants as possible, and speakers will have 90 seconds to provide their input. If you don't get the chance to speak today, or you'd like to provide additional input, you may send an email to californianature@resources.ca.gov. You can send a letter via postal mail or leave a voice message at 1-800-417-0668. And we'll repeat these options throughout the workshop. We're also requesting that participants consider how you would address the questions that were posed to today's advisory panelists, and to provide your input on those questions within 1 week of each topical workshop. Now I'll hand it back to Jennifer for an overview of the topical advisory panel.
So let me first say that we know 90 seconds to speak about any of these topics isn't enough. We know that. We also know that a lot of people want to weigh in out loud. So we're doing our best to accommodate as many people as possible. But please do take advantage of the opportunity to share more substantive comments in writing. I keep hoping we're going to get to in-person discussions, but that doesn't seem to be on the agenda. So in the meantime, I hope you'll continue to meet us here in Zoom and make this as good as it can be. So the purpose of these topical advisory panels is to address key topics and questions to support the development of the Pathways to 30 by 30 document and the CA Nature GIS. Workshops held earlier in the summer also informed the development of the Climate Smart Land Strategy, which will be released in coming weeks in draft. Each advisory panel has produced a summary document that gives context to their topic area, offers technical or other insights, and provides key recommendations. And we know we could have chosen a lot of different people for these panels. I happen to think we've chosen really well, but I also know there's tremendous expertise across the state on conservation-related issues. So we're also asking the public to provide their perspectives and insights on the topics and key questions being asked. So the topics we've covered and are covering are climate action. On June 8th, we heard from the panel and the public on opportunities to address climate change and how to best deliver on the state's goal to achieve carbon neutrality and build climate resilience. Equity. On June 15th, we explored opportunities for the state to advance and promote equity and access through its conservation and climate smart land strategies. Biodiversity. On July 27th, we discussed how to protect and maintain biodiversity. And finally, we're holding two workshops related to defining conservation. Today, we're talking about the conservation of lands, and next Tuesday at this time, we'll discuss coastal waters. So we often get asked how the members were selected to be on each panel. We invited the participation of credible, independent individuals with experience or expertise on the relevant topic to serve on these panels. We selected them to represent, as much as possible, a diversity of perspectives, backgrounds, and experience, including geographies. We sought academic and research experience when possible, but we also looked for practitioners with on-the-ground expertise. But critically important, we looked for panelists who could represent a broad array of issues in their fields. We really weren't looking for advocates for a particular position or point of view. We definitely did not set this up as a battle of stakeholders. Really, the idea is it's a synthesis of the topic and a conversation starter. Additionally, we chose the panel moderators based on their ability to foster a broad, inclusive dialogue that welcomes diverse views. So last week, the summary document for advancing 30 by 30 and conservation of lands was released. The advisory panel and you, the public, have been asked to address several questions related to land conservation, including how might the state define conservation for the purposes of 30 by 30? What types of lands could be considered conserved and under what conditions? And how can we best track and count them? And finally, what are the most efficient, effective, and equity-driven tools, strategies, and partnerships for conserving California's lands? The specific questions can be found on our project website, which is being linked in the chat right now, I think. So using the questions and their expertise, the advisory panel collaborated to distill current knowledge available, highlight gaps and needs, and develop recommendations to inform our 30% by 2030 commitment. So in a moment, we'll hear from the panel members themselves on these topics as they share their findings with us. You're likely to hear many things you agree with. It's equally likely you'll hear things you disagree with. This is expected and welcomed. We're interested in hearing from the public on how you would address and answer these same questions. So please provide your input to us as soon as possible. So please join me in welcoming the members of the advisory panel. First, Justin Brashares, who is the panel moderator and professor of wildlife ecology and conservation at the University of California, Berkeley Department of Environmental Science, Policy and Management. Anjali Jain Figueroa, Associate Director of the Green Info Network. Mark Hennelly, Vice President of Legislative Affairs and Public Policy for the California Waterfowl Association. Nina Roberts, Professor, Department of Recreation, Parks and Tourism, and Faculty Director of Community Engaged Scholarship and Learning at San Francisco State University. Jeanette Tuatelli-Lewis, President and CEO of Big Sur Land Trust and Board Chair of the California Council of Land Trusts. Tiana Williams-Clausen, who's the Wildlife Department Director for the Yurok Tribe. And finally, Sean Woods, Chief of Planning and Development Agency at the Los Angeles County Department of Parks and Recreation. And now I will turn it over to Justin to lead the panel presentation. Take it away, Justin.
Well, thank you very much, Jen, for that introduction of our panel. And it has been my great pleasure to serve as moderator for an inspiring group of panelists to provide findings and recommendations on the conservation of lands under California's 30 by 30 initiative. And could I ask for the next slide, please? I would like to start by saying our panel recognizes the remarkable history of conservation, of land conservation in California. And that conservation has included such luminaries as Roosevelt and Muir. But we also recognize that that history has included far too few authors, too few voices, and has excluded the perspectives of too many. And as a panel, we thank CNRA, Secretary Crowfoot, and Deputy Secretary Norris for giving us an opportunity to include our voices and perspectives in this discussion of California's 30 by 30. And we also recognize and welcome the inclusion of so many other voices and perspectives as we work towards what we believe is really the only meaningful way to achieve truly lasting conservation in California. And in our panel recommendations, we've really tried to draw from this past history and take lessons and models and tools that have worked, but also to lean heavily on what we've seen as new conservation and opportunities to use new tools in conservation science, practice, and of course, inclusion and equity. A slide, please. I will rely on my fellow panelists to dig into the details of our finding and recommendations, but I wanted to briefly touch on three recommendations that appear early in our accompanying document. And those recommendations can be summarized as follow. First and foremost, we see California's 30 by 30 initiative, when achieved, as the start, as only the beginning of a new era of conservation in California. And as a new era, as the beginning of a new era, we will rely and expect the state, and working with the state, to rely on active and adaptive management and restoration practices to ensure these new areas meet their goals of protecting biodiversity while enhancing equity and inclusion. And we also feel strongly, as other panels have before us, that a key to California's 30 by 30 of lands and inland waterways will be balancing biodiversity protection with the needs of humans, including ecosystem services that humans rely on from these areas, as well as for recreation, spiritual uses, and others. And finally, while California's 30 by 30 will surely embrace the range of modern tools that are used to conserve lands, we feel strongly as a panel that we must not lose the importance of durability of protection, that this protection must ensure conservation over ecologically meaningful timescales. And we can get into that, what that means further as a panel later. So wanting to protect time, I will now hand the microphone over to panelist Tiana Williams-Clausen, and I'll ask for the next, okay, you're there, you're on the next slide. So Tiana, take us away.
Thank you, Justin, very much for that introduction. So I'll jump in and say that one thing that the panel members all really seem to agree on is that we have to recognize that humans are a part of the system, not external to it. And so humans have a great capacity for impacting our environment. And I think if we think about environmental impacts, we tend to think of sprawling cities with smogged air or forests razed to the ground. And obviously these things happen. But we have examples of humans living in relationship and balance with nature in California for thousands of years, utilizing wise use practices and actively managing through things such as traditional prescribed burns, which created and maintained vital habitat and which remain a powerful tool today. Though many systems have experienced negative impacts, we can reinstate these conservation practices and that ethos where they have faltered and continue to restore our landscape and waterways. The question is, what impact do we choose to have? Will it improve our system or will it degrade it? If I could have the next slide, please. Recognition of our role as stewards will be essential for reaching the goals of 30 by 30 and long-term conservation success. We'll talk more later about taking a diversified approach to conservation, but even with conservation under the strictest kind of preservation paradigm, humans have a role in restoring and maintaining landscapes. And even the most degraded system has the potential for healing and contributing to the ecosystem and all species who rely on it, including humans. I like to look at our own Redwood National and State Park systems. I'm from far northern California, which, while under that more preservationist tradition, takes a very active role in restoration, managing not only for habitat retention, but for human enjoyment as well, understanding the mutual benefits of that relationship. And there are also many great examples of working lands actively contributing to conservation goals. For example, use of uneven age forest stand management can support both economy and restoration of old growth forest characteristics to benefit late sterile forest specialists. Or grazed grasslands, which with wise use practices and protection of sensitive systems can provide important habitat for birds, mammals, and amphibians while also sequestering carbon. And for example, almost all lands can and should be available for traditional Native American cultural and religious practices, which are largely designed to be low impact. The important consideration here is that to be designated conservation areas, lands and waters need to be actively managed with clear, documentable conservation goals and enforcement where necessary and appropriate. If I could have the next slide, please. Ultimately, conservation needs to be proactive, protecting what we have and expanding upon that foundation to include restoration of degraded spaces to facilitate development of beneficial conservation spaces. A great example posed by the panel was the Baldwin Hills project in LA. And the Baldwin Hills is, of course, an area of degraded oil fields, but with a strong local coalition with plans and dreams to restore the landscape and create parklands that provide equitable access to park-poor communities. Obviously, it can't be considered conserved yet, but it's the kind of thinking that we should support through incentives to transition along a conservation spectrum towards restored and regenerative ecosystems. If I could have the next slide, please. Whatever the path forward is taken, ultimately, we need to determine how we will work with the land to nurture its potential and support biodiversity, climate resilience, and other conservation and human integration goals. This means taking a holistic and long-term or durable approach that looks at the system in question, what sort of help it needs, what sort of conservation services it can provide, and how we can healthfully integrate humans into it, taking into account the benefits we can provide, but also the potential burden we may place on an area. With that, if we can pass to the next slide, I'll hand this off to Jeanette. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiana. So another recommendation is that conservation must be flexible enough to prioritize local and regional goals. Given the incredible landscape and biological diversity of California and other regional complexities throughout the state, conservation is dependent on local and regional contexts. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. Conservation goals may be appropriate at the sub-regional level. This could be county, tribal, or other local jurisdiction, and then tailored to the ecosystems within. Watersheds and river systems can also be ideal planning units, and they're not bound by political jurisdictions. Conservation and management plans will therefore be different within different ecosystems and relevant to their unique regional pressures, including fire, climate, freshwater availability, human population, and capacity for restoration. It's important to note that not all regions of the state have local agencies, tribes, or organizations with the capacity or the willingness to take on regional conservation planning efforts. And without incentives or necessary funding, we will continue to see disparities in conservation planning and related investments across California. Next slide, please. Prioritizing inclusive planning processes is also important. Land conservation should integrate local communities in planning processes. Planning should be informed by those working on the ground and living within those communities that will be impacted by these decisions. Broad inclusion in local conservation planning and priorities should be the standard and not the exception. This will reinforce the equity goals of 30 by 30 and help build a wider and more diverse constituency for conservation. Regional priorities and collaborative planning processes should take precedence over priorities only driven by maps of conserved lands or resource priorities or maps developed by single agencies or organizations. These resources can be incredibly important in helping to inform planning, but they should not be alone driving this planning or prioritization process. Local governments, organizations, agencies, and residents should work together to identify, document, and report conservation measures and metrics, including the developing protections for sensitive cultural and ecological data. The state should dedicate sufficient funding for regional conservation planning efforts that requires broad cross-sectoral coalition building, priority setting, project planning, and implementation, while providing local agency and organizational support for planning. This funding is also critical for state and natural resource agencies. Finally, priority areas should be assessed periodically during the implementation and beyond to ensure the metrics used to measure conservation success are achieving the goals of biodiversity, access, and climate resilience. Flexibility will be important as management needs and priorities adjust. They'll adjust for migrating species and habitats, adjusting to a changing climate, and of course, adaptive management that takes place and as new approaches are also being developed. I'll now pass it to Anjuli. Next slide, please.
The next recommendation is that conservation should be conducted across a spectrum of landscapes with tiered goals for each land category. Next slide, please. This recommendation acknowledges the variety of landscapes in California and how each has something to contribute, although perhaps to differing goals. For example, urban parks, which are good for recreation due to their accessibility and location near people, can help connect people to nature, but they may not offer the wildlife biodiversity, for example, that a reserve has. Still, this does not mean that we should only focus on one land type. Instead, we seek diversity of landscapes within areas and regions, and thus across the state. This view hopefully enables landscape level planning. Next slide, please. Since the different landscapes support different goals, we suggest comparing achievement of goals within a landscape. In this way, you won't have to compare an urban park to a wildlife preserve. Instead, within the category of urban parks, we can see which parks are excelling at a specified benefit or providing multiple benefits, and thus emulate the conservation practices for those landscapes that are most successful within a land category. Similarly, in the category of forest preserves, deserts, and other landscapes. The key here is the idea that conservation should be adaptive and should have restorative management, especially in the face of climate change, and particularly for biodiversity, which is a key priority. Regions may have many of these landscapes, and their regional goals can help determine which land category to prioritize. This figure is from a recent working paper for 30 by 30 at the national level, and shows an example of land areas when one specific goal is considered. Sometimes lands overlap, but often they're different depending on that goal. A similar approach could be refined within the land category. Next slide, please. Once the metrics are chosen, monitoring and collecting data will be essential as a way to measure progress.
Mark,
Central coordination has proven to be effective in many ways. For example, that has been our experience with the California Protected Areas Database and the California Conservation Easement Database, and the California Nature Platform may fill this role. The effort must be adequately funded and should emphasize quality assurance and control of the data. Local and regional managers know their lands best and should be invited to contribute their data and their metrics. I will pass it to Sean next. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Anjali. The advisory panel strongly believes that community engagement, inclusion, and partnership building will be essential for reaching the goals of 30 by 30 and long-term conservation success. Next slide, please. First, I'd like to start out with a past example of effective engagement and inclusion, and then transition into our recommendations. In 1976, the California Coastal Act prioritized maximum access to the coast for all the people, alongside protecting its natural and scenic beauty. And because of this, today, over 90% of California voters say that the condition of the oceans and beaches in California is important to them personally. So with this 30 by 30 initiative, we now have an opportunity to build that same kind of constituency for all of California's land and waters. We could see 90% of Californians support the 30 by 30 goals if we also focus on an inclusive and expansive community engagement process that seeks out diverse perspectives and begins to foster a public conversation around the important role that conservation plays for all the people. The advisory panel has also underscored the recommendation that inclusion is the bedrock of success for 30 by 30. Coalition building and collaboration with mainstream and non-traditional conservation organizations, such as those that work with communities of color and prioritize equitable access to nature, is essential. In the past, with California-approved park bond measures, what we've seen is that mainstream conservation organizations have been given the opportunity to highlight a priority list of projects that are often overwhelmingly composed of traditional land conservation acquisitions, rather than acquisitions that prioritize equitable access for people to our public lands. There have been some improvements, but with the 30 by 30 initiative, we still need to rethink the traditional process for state-funded acquisitions and for who has a seat at the table when land conservation priorities are being set. The advisory panel also recognizes that conservation of lands not only occur across both physical landscapes, but also socioeconomic divides. There are often challenges around shared resources such as water, which can put rural and urban conservation and community groups and farmers in competing positions. Effective and productive partnerships and co-management strategies must recognize this inherent tension and strive towards consensus building to achieve the most effective and long-lasting conservation outcomes. It is also important to regularly and proactively engage with tribal governments. First, the US government has largely failed to manage public lands in a manner that is consistent with its trust and treaty obligations to tribal nations. And government agencies in the wider conservation community have often failed to recognize the significant contributions that Indigenous peoples have made to conservation of biodiversity as the original and best stewards of the nation's natural resources. With the 30 by 30, we have a great opportunity to better acknowledge these histories and to respect the conservation efforts that tribes have undertaken in the face of adversity. Moving forward, we must incorporate the impacts and benefits to tribal lands into conservation planning and promote the tribe's best interests, as well as provide the resources necessary for cultural survival and economic development. And finally, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. California's 30 by 30 initiative should seek out and support existing successful coalitions and partnerships that have transcended competing interests and can serve as a template for regional collaboratives, especially with a stronger focus on the incorporation of environmental justice and health equity organizations. The report highlights a whole host of effective partnerships and collaborations. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list, and we welcome all of your ideas and input on this subject. Next slide, please. And now I'll hand it over to Mark Henley.
Mark, you'll need to unmute yourself.
I'll be talking about the importance of non-regulatory approaches to conservation and partnerships with the private sector in advancing 30 by 30. So about half of California is privately owned. Much of this is agricultural ranching land near urban areas that is threatened by development. New regulations, while sometimes necessary, can often be a disincentive for landowners to protect, restore, and enhance wildlife habitat. For example, some landowners manage their property to minimize habitat values just to avoid attracting ESA-listed species. While many farmers, ranchers, and other private landowners want to protect their land and conserve wildlife, they often lack the necessary resources. Altering their land practices has to pencil out for them financially and support their agricultural or other business operations. Next slide. So incentive-based programs and public-private partnerships have proven highly successful in conserving land and wildlife resources across the United States. And a prime example of this is waterfowl and wetland conservation efforts, which includes various elements, and I'll name a few. First, there's the Federal Wetlands Reserve Program. This is an easement program that has protected more than 2.3 million acres nationwide and some of the most vulnerable wetlands in California's Central Valley. There's the North American Wetlands Conservation Act that's helped to restore and enhance wetlands on both private and public lands. Much of the work is accomplished through the assistance of NGOs and the use of matching funds. And about 30 million acres nationwide have been affected through this program. In state, we have Department of Fish and Wildlife and Wildlife Conservation Board landowner incentive programs. These include both conservation easement type programs and other habitat agreements. Typically, they provide financial incentives, technical assistance, and management plans for the landowners. And then we also have the migratory bird joint ventures, and a prime example of this is the Central Valley joint venture operating here in the Sacramento Valley. These are public-private partnerships that rely heavily on NGOs to deliver habitat benefits on the ground, again, mostly for waterfowl purposes. So the result of all of this is that most waterfowl populations are above their management objectives. Some are even overabundant and create depredation issues for farmers. There was a report released in the journal Science in 2019 showing that while North America has lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years, waterfowl were one of the few bright spots within that. Managed wetland habitat on private lands in California has also increased significantly since the 1980s and 1990s, when many of the state and federal landowner incentive programs got started. Next slide. An incentive-based approach through 3030 will require significant funding, no doubt about that. Funding of existing private lands programs and likely the creation of new innovative ones. Many current programs have limited budgets and simply cannot meet landowner demand. New resource bond measures, budget augmentations, and other legislation will be needed. It will likely take many years to acquire this necessary funding, and it's of course affected by our state budget revenues, bond debt, and even politics. Funding is needed not only to pay landowners for these habitat benefits that we're seeking, but also to provide staff to administer the programs. Many existing programs are simply understaffed and need additional PYs to most effectively administer them. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Nina.
Excellent, thank you, Mark. Hey, everybody, thanks for hanging in with us on this important session as I wind us all down. What I want to share in terms of the idea of a recommendation is to really support meeting the goals as suggested and addressed by the other panelists. One way to look at this category is look at it as a systems change approach. The idea of challenging can be more difficult for people, but it's all about addressing the root causes of agency issues and social problems, for example. So the idea is that staff within DNR, within the Department of Natural Resources, partners, users of the lands being managed by DNR, in order to reach these 30 by 30 goals, both the institutional systems and the status quo must be challenged. In other words, in order for change to occur, we have to stop saying, or attempt to stop saying, it's just how we do things here. It's how we've always done it. It's best that you don't rock the boat. That is a very dangerous proposition. So we can't have real transformative impact on our employees, leadership, the organizational structure, unless all stakeholders are truly willing to move into a systems change agreement and challenge what is known as the status quo. Oftentimes, leaders are too afraid in terms of doing this for a lot of reasons. For example, they might be unwilling to turn the spotlight of accountability onto themselves. They don't know how to get started. There's a lack of organizational readiness. But in order to look towards the future, we cannot ignore any lessons of the past as well. Traditions have their place, yet we have to move beyond that. So why is this important? People often wonder, when you challenge the status quo and try to change the system, it means you identify new and better ways of doing things on behalf of your project, your stakeholders, and the department managing agencies as a whole. So part of that revolves around following trends, as you've heard many so far, and act on them. And it also means that you add value. And that's the very basis for being successful and achieving the goals of 3030. It can be daunting to speak up, to go against the grain, even when we know something should be different. We don't always have the courage to take action. And when we do, we risk that our ideas could fail because our colleagues don't listen, or we're overruled or ignored. So we have to ask the right questions, including, why are decisions being made the way they are? By who and to what end or benefit? And prioritize your ideas and recommendations. And we've heard that before as well. Next slide, please. So many traditional land conservation acquisitions and strategies are very valuable and will remain part of conservation, but they cannot really overshadow approaches that prioritize the equitable access that you've heard in terms of public land use. Innovative solutions to restoration, shared stewardship of lands between the different agencies, tribes, as you've heard, nonprofits, volunteers, the whole bit. So the 30 by 30 initiative must also fully embrace emerging future conservation leaders. They are the most racially diverse, as far as that millennial generation, that this nation has ever seen. We need to involve them and embrace them and hire them, and as they will provide multiple perspectives and cross-cultural experiences. So again, it's challenging to find new solutions, including the need for funding, but avoid saying our budget won't allow, because that becomes more of an excuse in terms of the efforts that have to occur. And I want to close by saying that in order to move from mediocrity to greatness, that the department has to venture out. To build something substantial, we must all take a very strong stand to do what we know is right for the future and to meet the goals of 3030. To create something meaningful, we must create significance. And I'm going to leave it at that and turn it back over to Justin.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Nina, and to all of our panelists and to all of you in attendance today. And I believe we have just about 10 minutes or so for questions of the panel. And I hope folks will please add your questions to the Q&A. And we've already received more questions than we'll have time to address. And some of those questions are outside of the purview of the panel, but there are several really excellent points in the questions, and I'd like to kick a few of them over to the panel. One of those questions, which of course we grappled with as a panel, and we of course is very current to us in the state, is how our concept or our recommendations for land conservation and conservation of inland waters in California can be dynamic enough, can be adaptive enough to try and address for the unforeseen future of fire, drought, or other challenges that we know we don't have a real analog from the past to guide us. So I wonder if any committee members would be willing to talk. I think it emphasizes the need for private land engagement and private public partnerships. But I wonder if anyone from the panel would like to take a stab at talking about this sort of dynamic vision of conservation that might be able to adapt and adjust to some of these new challenges and threats.
Happy to say a few words, I guess, on this topic. And, you know, I think that this is part of what I think is really driving the urgency for agency and nonprofit and tribal partnerships to be working together during this time. Really feels that it's too much for any one organization or entity to really take on. And, you know, it just happens that I was on a call today with an organization up in the Feather River area and with the Dixie Fire, and just really trying to get a sense of just the devastation that's happening there in that community right now. And the need that is going to have to, I mean, the need that is, you know, that has arrived, that is really requiring all of these groups to be working together to both address critical community needs as well as landscape level restoration needs that are going to have to happen. And so I don't really have a specific, this is how we need to do it, but I think it really speaks to the need for us to be working together. And that I think requires that there also be some of the challenges, I think, sometimes in working in these sorts of partnerships are some of the administrative sort of things that can get in the way. And of course, I think, you know, because so much is developed by, you know, attorneys and what agencies are able to do. I think sometimes we need to really rethink, are we making it more difficult for us to do the right thing by having so many barriers to partnerships in place, and how might we move past some of those to collaboratively work together so that residents, community organizations, state agencies, federal agencies can all be a part of helping to lift communities up and keep our landscapes healthy.
Thank you, Jeanette, for fielding that one. There are several excellent comments about existing efforts underway in California that must not be overlooked. And I just wanted to emphasize, as a panel, we strongly support that. And we really tried to emphasize in our document and in our comments today, the essential role of the state and California 30 by 30 as an accelerator and incubator of exciting things that are already happening on the ground. So I want to be clear, and panelists should jump in if you disagree with me, but that our recommendation isn't that we need an entirely new concept of California, conservation in California, but that there are many exciting opportunities and models and groups that are forming coalitions, exactly grassroots coalitions that we believe need to be supported and expanded. And that may apply to particular landscapes and places. Commenters have pointed out the importance of desert conservation. We absolutely agree. It's a priority, of course. The issues of water conservation and management are huge on so many levels. And these are all things we certainly do not want to lose sight of as a panel. I wanted to ask the panel, or ask folks to jump in. There's a really comment about something I know we all care about, which is the potential role of citizen science, or the inclusion of citizens. And I know as a panel, we've talked about the importance of monitoring, and that, again, that the job doesn't stop once we get to 30%. It's really only beginning. And I wonder if any folks would like to talk about the role of stakeholder engagement, and specifically citizen science, participatory science, or things of that nature. Nina, you're smiling. Can I ask you to contribute?
Well, you know, it's a critical component, and there are many agencies and organizations that actually have citizen science programs very intentionally established and well established. And I believe that there's value there, because part of what in terms of my experience working with different types of natural resource agencies, park-related agencies, from urban to the National Park Service, is that the people that are in the system, going back to the systems, is that the sentiment is, we are the experts. We are here because we have the knowledge and we know what to do. And so what happens is that omits the involvement of locals who have a level of expertise and experiences that are overlooked or, again, as I mentioned, ignored. And so by creating very viable citizen science type programs, gathering that information, gathering the data, providing a level of education, but learning from the communities that you're reaching out to and engaging is huge. And so it creates a broader pool, a broader spectrum of understanding, of knowledge, and really being able to set some new parameters. And because we ignore some of these trends at our peril, and by involving locals with expert knowledge, we're all in a better place of reaching these goals more effectively and efficiently. So those are a few comments that I want to share on that. Very, very important. We need more citizen science, honestly.
Justin, I want to point out we have about 5 minutes left, so maybe one more question or two.
Okay,
Justin,
great.
I just wanted to say one quick thing about what building on Nina's comments. Working in Los Angeles with urban parks, we utilize iNaturalist, the app, to sort of deputize or democratize the whole process around categorizing biodiversity in urban setting. And we found it was really effective, people not really recognizing what existed in their backyard and going into an urban park and seeing insects and birds and bugs and things like that, and making them involved in sort of the process made them, it developed stewardship. It really did. It's for the resources themselves. So I just think that, we have such little time here to discuss it, but I think citizen science is something that is so critical and important to this process in terms of community engagement.
And if anyone's looking for a model, check out the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. They have an outstanding citizen science program if you're looking for models and how people are doing it. Thanks for that addition, Sean.
Yeah, thank you both. That's excellent. I want to move on to another question. I'm going to kick it over to Mark to give the first comments on this, but several commenters have addressed the critical issue of how do we engage private lands through the 30 by 30 initiative. And as many folks have pointed out, we recognize private lands are critical to biodiversity, critical to threatened and endangered species in California and across North America for that matter. And several folks have asked quite reasonably about how you really incentivize that, how do you fund that? And to what degree how do we count? What do we count as conserved on those private lands? And it's a tough question. And Mark, I wonder if you would take the first stab at that cluster of questions.
Happy to. Yeah, I think first you have to build trust and credibility with the landowner community. You've got to have folks who have strong connections to the landowners, who communicate with them on a regular basis. You certainly need to, again, offer the carrot approach. The regulatory approach, I should say, hasn't worked well with a lot of private landowners. They're going to shy away from that. But offering incentives is a very good start. And typically, that takes a little while to build those programs. The farmers may take them a few years to find out by word of mouth from other landowners that these programs are out there and operating well. So you do need to have a little bit of patience with that. They don't develop overnight. And then, just trying to, make sure that we work as closely with them as possible. They have the local knowledge of the land. They're out there every day. Getting back to, having citizen involvement, they're the ones that live in these communities and out on these lands. So we really need to incorporate their input into how we're trying to accomplish conservation across the landscape.
Well, thank you, Mark. I think we're about out of time. I apologize for all the questions we didn't get to, the excellent questions we didn't get to that I know, having talked to this excellent panel that folks love to talk about. But I better just stop there and keep us on time.
Thank you so much, Justin and the panel members. Your comments and ideas were really insightful and inspiring. And also thanks to the participants for your thoughtful questions. We are going to take a 5-minute break before we begin the public input session. We are going to show you on the screen the questions that the panelists and the public participants have been asked to address, so you can take a look at those. When we come back, we will start the public input session, and we will be taking public input from speakers who pre-registered to speak in reverse alphabetical order by last name. So if your name is towards the end, if your last name is towards the end of the alphabet, you can get ready. So again, we're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 4:05 and we'll begin the public input session then. Thanks very much. Welcome back, everyone. We're getting ready to begin the public input portion of the workshop. My co-facilitator, Cece, and I will take turns managing this portion of the meeting. The advisory panel's insight and the public input that we received tonight and via other communications will be used in the development of the Pathways to 30 by 30 document. When you registered for the workshop, you are asked to indicate whether you wanted to provide a 90-second verbal comment by pre-registering. So if you pre-registered, you'll have the opportunity to speak first. We'll stay until all pre-registered speakers have spoken. If time allows, we'll provide an opportunity for others to provide comment. If there isn't time for you to provide comment, you can submit comments via email or voicemail. The options are listed on the screen here. So we will start by taking pre-registered speakers in small groups in reverse alphabetical order by last name. You'll have 90 seconds to speak, and there'll be a timer on the screen so you can see that. We ask that you don't give or receive time to other speakers. We'll list 5 speakers on each slide. When you see or hear your name, we'll ask you to please click the raise hand button, or if you're on the phone, press *9. You can also press *9 to lower your hand. The facilitator will ask you to unmute when it's your turn, and if you're on the phone, you'll need to press *6. If you are on the phone, I notice we have a number of phone callers tonight. If you're on the phone and you need technical support, you can call this number, 858-522-9702. So for phone callers who need technical support, that's 858-522-9702. If you're not a phone caller and you need technical support, you can put the message in the chat with our technical support staff. Finally, to accommodate Spanish speakers, we're allowing 3 minutes in order to allow time for interpretation. If you're providing your input in Spanish, please announce that when we unmute you so that the interpreter can prepare. And for all speakers, we'd ask that you speak clearly at a reasonable pace so that we can accommodate our English speakers, our Spanish speakers, excuse me, our non-English speakers. It looks like we've been asked to go back a slide so that people can get the information about emailing or leaving a voicemail. So again, to email your comments, californianature@resources.ca.gov, or to send in a voicemail, that's 1-800-417-0668. Okay, a couple more things. If your name on Zoom does not match the name you registered, if you could rename yourself so that we'll recognize you, we'd appreciate that. And finally, we appreciate your patience as we navigate technology-related delays, and also please forgive us if we mispronounce your name. Okay, so we will begin our public comment session. We'll put up a slide with the first speakers. Okay, our first 5 speakers are Samuel Young, Beth Wurzburg, Chris Wright, Melanie Winter, and Andrea Williams. Samuel Young, Beth Wurzburg, Chris Wright, Melanie Winter, and Andrea Williams. So if you see or hear your name, please raise your hand. I see several of you have already done so. Thank you. So Samuel Young, please unmute yourself and go ahead. We may have just lost Samuel. Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, excellent. My name is Sam Young. I'm the Important Plant Areas Program Manager for the California Native Plant Society. Thank you for your 30 by 30 efforts to preserve California's globally significant biodiversity, which is primarily driven by our unique flora, of which almost 30% is found nowhere else. I was a bit concerned that the report promoted moving beyond no net loss approaches, which are essential to preventing extirpation of rare species and habitats such as wetlands, more than 90% of which have been lost in California. We must not lose sight of the biodiversity focus of 30 by 30. The panel's recommendation of conservation should be conducted across a spectrum of landscapes with tiered goals for each land category is fine, so long as those conservation goals are focused on maintaining the state's unique biodiversity. The example of single crop farmlands being put under conservation easements may indeed be a strategy for regional food security, assuming industrial agricultural products are remaining in the region and not being shipped elsewhere. However, this is outside the scope of 30 by 30, even from a working land standpoint, since, as noted in the report, this type of land use may provide little biodiversity or climate resilience without other environmental enhancements. Biodiversity conservation needs to remain the central focus of the 30 by 30 effort. Conservation of remaining natural lands is a useful tool for preserving biodiversity, making area-based solutions such as 30 by 30 attractive avenues to safeguard our state's biodiversity. However, acres alone are not a sufficient metric by which to measure conservation success, and representation matters a lot. We need to make sure that biodiversity at all its levels is represented within metrics of success. And there are numerous efforts that are ongoing out there the state can take advantage of that have already done a lot of this analysis, such as important.
Thank you, Samuel. I'm gonna have to stop you here to allow time for all of our other speakers. Thank you. Our next speaker is Beth Wurzburg. Beth, if you could unmute yourself, and just a reminder to folks to try to speak relatively slowly. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Beth Wurzburg. I'm with the East Bay chapter of the California Native Plant Society, and I'd like to urge the committee to consider how land that is set aside will be used. In particular, it's important to remember that even federal parkland, state parkland, and regional parkland can't be considered safe or conserved or preserved by the 30 by 30 Land Protection Act unless the uses are considered. And I would also urge the community to be proactive and protect what we already have that's of high value, because that's far easier. It's low-hanging fruit, and it's much less costly to do that than restoration. And that will free up funds to be used to restore other lands that will require more intensive care. An example in our local area is Tesla Park, slated as a state park to be an expansion area for Carnegie OHV Park. Tesla is urged to be protected by at least 30 conservation organizations, local citizens, local agencies, politicians, and the county. And yet we're having trouble preserving this place that has extremely high conservation value for both endangered animals, for high biodiversity, for critical wildlife linkage corridor, and for strong community support. Further, there are the funds to reimburse the state parks for the cost of exchanging the land for the OHV community. And we'd urge you to consider local conservation values. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next speaker is Andrea Williams. Andrea, go ahead and unmute.
Hi, my name is Andrea Williams, and I'm the Director of Biodiversity Initiatives for the California Native Plant Society. I want to thank you for the time today, and also for doing the last name in reverse order. As you can tell, we skewed late in the alphabet. I also wanted to remind us of the charge that's in the EO. 1A is to establish a baseline assessment of California's biodiversity that builds upon existing data and information, utilizes best available science and traditional ecological knowledge, and can be updated over time. And this has not been done, and a survey of California biodiversity is essential to determining where we need to focus. Number 2 is conserve at least 30% of California's land and coastal waters by 2030. And I want to stress the at least. 30% should be a floor, not a ceiling. And we need to keep biodiversity and its promotion and maintenance central to our efforts, because biodiversity is itself central to human health, food security, carbon storage, and climate resilience. We do need to build a portfolio of protected lands that is well distributed geographically and contains ecosystems and corridors to allow for all life to benefit. We need to ensure monitoring and management are supported at multiple scales to ensure the full complement of species expected or present, that stressors are understood and alleviated and natural processes can occur. And this is not a one-time investment, but a long-term portfolio that contain a range of benefits, but must have a minimum set of qualifications so that lands included are not a drain on limited resources, that's supported and improved through adaptive management. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I'll give one more opportunity for Chris Wright or Melanie Winter. Okay, let's move on to our next set of 5 speakers. Okay, our next 5 speakers are Bev van Dor, Tim Vendlinski, Robert Jan Roy van de Hoek, Lorraine Turk, and Don Trigstad. So Bev van Dor, Tim Vendlinski, Robert Jan Roy van de Hoek, Lorraine Turk, and Don Trigstad. Okay, I see we have Don Trigstad. Don, go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comment, please.
Hello, thank you so much for providing this information and opportunity to give input. And I really appreciate all of the work you've done in carefully considering what to include here and what the criteria should be, especially the geographic diversity, the biodiversity, the access from different populations. But I have not yet heard how specific pieces of land will be determined to be included or not included, or what the process is for people wanting to include them. I am an activist with the Save Jackson State Demonstration Forest Group. We are a coalition of environmentalists and individuals and Native Americans and a variety of other nonprofit groups. And so I love that you are talking to groups and coalitions already and including that. But how would we, for example, or any other group, go about requesting to include a specific area in the 30 by 30 plan? And with that, I could go on and on, of course, like everybody else, but I'll stop a little early.
Thank you for your comment, Dawn. I see a phone caller. The last 4 digits are 3319. So I will unmute you, and please let me know if you're one of the 5 speakers listed here. Press *6 to unmute yourself, phone caller.
Hello, yes, I am one of the 5 in this batch with my last name begins with V.
What's your name, please?
Robert Jan van de Hoek, and my nickname's Roy.
Thank you, please go ahead.
Okay, hello and good afternoon. And I understand we're speaking about landscapes on the land ecosystem, so I'll focus on that, and on ocean, I'll speak at the next meeting on that. And I'm calling from the land that is the Tongva and Chumash of the Southern California area. And I worked more than 40 years in the federal government, state government, county, and city governments at various times. I'd like to address the Carrizo Plain in Central California, where I was the United States Department of Interior's lead wildlife biologist and manager for the Carrizo Plain in the first years, where the federal government interacted with the Nature Conservancy and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, then Fish and Game. And Tule elk and pronghorn antelope were brought back by the Department of Fish and Game from the Owens Valley and from Northeast California, and so far they're doing good. But there were some mistakes done in the process, such as opening up hunting seasons for the pronghorn antelope and the Tule elk within a few years after they were brought there, and that affected their behavior. And the Nature Conservancy experimented with electric fences to try to guide, to get away from barbed wire fences, but that didn't work either because of the issues of trying to run electricity in a remote area. And this was an area that was
I'm
acquired.
sorry that I'm going to have to cut you off because we're allowing 90 seconds for comment. I want to make sure we have time for all speakers and that we're fair. Thank you. Thank you for your
Okay,
comment.
can I have 15 seconds to just sum up, please? Okay, so I think the idea is acquisition is really important. Acquisition is the key, but restoration is not what's needed. Instead of let the land heal at its own pace after it's been acquired, phase out cultural type of activities like range, and do recovery endangered species. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. So I'll read the other names on this slide again. Bev Von Dor, Tim Van Linsky, Lorraine Turk. Okay, let's move on to our next set of 5 speakers, please. Our next speakers are Hannah Tikalski, Charles Thomas, Joan Taylor, Ellen Taylor, and Karen Swaim. Hannah Tikalski, Charles Thomas, Joan Taylor, Ellen Taylor, and Karen Swaim. So I see we have Hannah Tikalski. Hannah, unmute yourself and provide your comment, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I apologize. I'm in public transit right now. Thank you so much for the draft report. I thought it was really good. I really want to see more aggressive action as far as how we measure what land is drawing down carbon and cycling carbon effectively, which we know will help with all of the biodiversity, both flora and fauna, that we all want to protect and restore. I'd love to see a mandate of improving 1% soil organic matter across the board, whether you're a private landholder, public landholder, agricultural, park, whatever it is. I think we need to know what your organic matter is in your soil. Is your soil alive? Is it not? How alive is it? And I think we need to mandate that everybody gets just that 1%. There's so much good research out there that shows if we could just get to 1% and peck 2, 3, 4% in improvement, that we would go so far to restoring the carbon cycle and getting everything back to normal. So that's pretty much my comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next we have Ellen Taylor. Ellen, please unmute yourself.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Ellen Taylor, and I'm the chairperson for the Lost Coast League, which is on the Northern California coast. I appreciated what Nina Roberts had to say earlier about going outside the box. And in the present context of the IPCC finding recently, going outside the box means not having such an exaggerated respect for private property ownership. Private property ownership is frequently in the hands of very large landowners, the timber companies, and they are saddled with the profit motive. And to saddle this whole project with a profit motive for timber companies is handicapping it intolerably. On the other hand, with citizen scientists, we have volunteers who can do all kinds of projects for free, for nothing, just out of love. Also, the private companies are very good at getting around regulations. Somebody made that observation, such as certification and HCPs and those sorts of things. Mr. Van Hoek made the observation that we cannot actively restore property as successfully as we can allow it to restore itself. And a light touch and inclusion of many groups, such as here in the Mattole, where the Bear River tribe is included and the Wiyot tribe, is the most successful way to go about this. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I see that we have Charles Thomas. Charles, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
I am unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to thank the panel. They did some absolutely excellent work and appreciate that. My name is Charles Thomas. I am the Executive Director of Outward Bound Adventures, and I want to go back to a line that was put in the report that said to effectively conserve and restore these habitats, we need to understand ... And I'm putting in my own words, we need to understand the communities who will ultimately inherit the stewardship of these landscapes. So that especially means the vast majority of urban folks who don't yet know the importance and the value of these areas, not just for the benefit of us, for as humans that we derive from these areas, but really for the intrinsic worth and value of these landscapes without us. So when I speak of the vast majority, what I mean is the immeasurably large numbers of urban youth who don't know these landscapes even exist. Those youth who, when asked to go camping, go backpacking or hiking, they opt out. They say, no, I'm not there. So these young people are the intentional non-users of the outdoors, but no land is conserved or assured protection until every member of our society is educated about its value, especially those who are intentional non-users of the land. So we must ensure that every underserved, overlooked, and avoided population is afforded the education of conservation and through the luxury of physically experiencing these landscapes. Thank you, folks. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate you as well. Let's see, we have left on this slide, we have Joan Taylor and Karen Swaim. And just a reminder, if you are on the phone and you see or hear your name, you can press *9 to raise your hand, and otherwise use the raise hand button in Zoom. Okay, let's move on to our next set of speakers, please. We have Dave Sutton, Elizabeth Stover, Eliane Stefanik, sorry about that, Steve Springtime, Renee Spenst. So Dave Sutton, Elizabeth Stover, Eliane Stefanik, Steve Springtime, and Renee Spenst. Please raise your hand or press *9 if you're on the phone. I see we have a phone caller. The last 4 digits are 8584. So I'll please unmute yourself by pressing *6 and let us know who you are. Are you able to unmute yourself? 8584. Can you press?
How about now?
Yes, we hear you.
I went back and forth a few times. Hi, this is Dave Sutton. I'm the California Land Conservation Director for the Trust for Public Land. I'm also a parent. Would like to thank the Resources Agency and the panelists. I just have 2 overarching comments. One, as we all saw from yesterday's UN report, is just a state of urgency that we're in. Time is of the essence. Perfection is not attainable and would be the enemy of the good here. We should not overplan. We need to make decisions, learn from them, make mistakes. We cannot be too methodical nor do this at a historic pace. And the second comment is the state needs to invest at a different scale. Our California lobbyist, Rico Mastrodonado, recently sent a letter to the administration suggesting that we move $10 billion from the budget surplus to the 30 by 30 effort. I'd also encourage that we consider and work together on a permanent state funding source similar to the Land Water Conservation Fund federal funding source. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll read these names again. Elizabeth Stover, Eliane Stefanik, Steve Springtime, and Renee Spenst. Okay, not seeing any hands. We'll move to our next set of speakers. We have Chris Skyhawk, Jen Simmons, Matthew Simmons, Dan Silver, Donna Senauer. Chris Skyhawk, Jen Simmons, Matthew Simmons, Dan Silver, and Donna Senauer. Please raise your hand or press *9. I see we have Matthew Simmons. So please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Matthew Simmons. I'm with the Environmental Protection Information Center. And thank you for this opportunity to provide comment. I wanted to bring your attention to a particular piece of land in Northern California, Jackson Demonstration State Forest. Jackson is a state-owned coast redwood forest. It's almost 50,000 acres. And right now the state, and in particular CAL FIRE, manages it as an industrial timberland. And because of that management, the forest is really unhealthy. The watercourses are listed by NIMS as needing immediate restoration. Northern spotted owl is really not doing well in the forest. And it's all traced back to this ongoing logging. CAL FIRE still does clear cuts in these lands. They take out some of the largest trees in the forest. We're seeing trees over 70 inches at diameter breast height marked for cut by CAL FIRE. And so as part of 30 by 30, I think California should really consider conserving this land. And I know you talked about conserving doesn't mean no management, but I think it does mean less intense and more sustainable management. And Jackson is really a good place to do that because it's already state owned and it has this history and it can be fixed. And moreover, it's already a place that recreationists love to use. It has incredible carbon sequestration potential. And there's a Native American cultural heritage component here because currently they're unable to use the land because of its use as an industrial timberland. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Dan Silver. Dan, unmute yourself, please, and provide your comment.
Good afternoon, Dan Silver, Endangered Habitats League. In terms of conservation methods in Southern California, it's going to have to be primarily acquisition and fee title of private land. There's relatively little working land down here, and we have a lot of biodiversity. We have many existing programs that don't need to be reinvented. We have natural community conservation planning. These are off the shelf. They are ready to be implemented. The top priority of this administration at this very moment should be getting as much money as possible from the budget surplus, the historic budget surplus, to the Wildlife Conservation Board so that it can begin to act on 30 by 30. It is well prepared to do so. It is expert in biodiversity, and we need to start acting now. Biodiversity is being lost, the climate is changing. All this talk is wonderful. We can definitely implement it over time, but the time for action is upon us. The budget surplus is waiting for the administration to act on. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to read these names again. Chris Skyhawk, Jen Simmons, and Donna Senauer. All right, let's move on to our next set of speakers, please. We have Isabella Seiden Miller, Sandra Schubert, Melanie Schlotterbeck, Charles Schaefer, and Sharon Sand. Isabella Seiden Miller, Sandra Schubert, Melanie Schlotterbeck, Charles Schaefer, and Sharon Sand. So Isabella Seiden Miller is here. Please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Isabella Miller. I'm speaking at Seiden Miller, and I'm speaking on behalf of Kiss the Ground. My biggest hope in the advancement of the 30 by 30 initiative is that regeneration is a top priority in applied both in natural and working lands. In California, most of the US land has been impacted by humans, especially when you take into account our water cycles and soil loss. With the draining land, clear cutting of trees from hillsides, overgrazing and tilling, and leaving land bare, we've created such a significant loss of biodiversity and broke the hydrological cycle of our state. Our land doesn't function anymore. Water isn't being absorbed and retained in our landscapes. Desertification is spreading. We can change that. We can regenerate our soil and rehydrate California. causing significant rebound of biodiversity. What is often overlooked in land-based restoration and biodiversity recovery is the phenomenon of latent seed banks. This means that dominant species of plants and smaller organisms that can help bring back larger organisms can be restored when the conditions are recreated. This can only happen through regeneration. Conservation alone won't create this impact at a large enough scale. 30 by 30 is absolutely important. Conservation of already degraded land, especially in brittle environments, hasn't proven to help increase biodiversity. We need to support all landscape managers, public and private, to the regeneration of their land. Implementing monitoring abilities, like what California is doing for working in natural lands to regenerate, can be rewarded as part of the 30 by 30 initiative, will help to ensure biodiversity is successfully restored. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Melanie Schlotterbeck. Go ahead and unmute yourself, please, Melanie.
Hi there. My name is Melanie Schlotterbeck. I'm with the regional nonprofit Hills for Everyone. Our organization is more than 40 years old, and with that history and institutional knowledge, we have built relationships across the entire Puente Chino Hills Wildlife Corridor, which spans 4 counties and 12 cities. For us, relationships already exist with nonprofits, cities, agencies, and JPAs. Your goal should be to find the super connector organizations with regional missions. Additionally, for our hills, lands that have already been identified in a conceptual area protection plan include more than 12,000 acres available for preservation. The work to identify potential acquisitions has already occurred. Sometimes, most times, you have only one chance to buy land before its use is converted. You have forever to restore it. We are struggling here in Southern California, and I'm sure statewide, because state agencies like Cal State Parks and Cal Fish and Wildlife are critically underfunded. For example, State Parks hasn't been acquiring land in more than a decade. This must be resolved if our largest land manager of state-owned lands isn't in the game. Funding is critical for on-the-ground work. Without it, agencies and conservation groups will continue to flounder. Acquisition funding continues to be biased to the north. Southern California, where most people has historically been underfunded for land acquisition. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Charles Schaefer. Go ahead and unmute yourself, please, Charles.
There we go. My name's Charles Schaefer, and I'm with the Sierra Club in San Francisco Bay Area. And we're working on a project or campaign to preserve San Francisco Bay and the baylands around the bay. It's an estuary of significance in the Western United States, and it has a rather unique problem in that the baylands around the bay are managed or owned by something like 40 different local entities, all of whom have a lot of pressure from their local constituents to do whatever is appropriate for that local entity. However, what is appropriate for each local entity is not necessarily appropriate for the bay itself. For example, if someone builds a cement seawall, it tends to reflect the wave action and will wind up inundating somebody else. We need to have a regional approach to saving the marshes and the wetlands. And so somehow like a regional agency or something to that effect needs to take over. There's BCDC managing the water, but they stop at the tide line and they do not manage the land around. So it is important that we do something about that land. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Sharon Sand. Sharon, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Sharon Sand. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm the California Public Grants Manager with the Trust for Public Land. And I'd like to thank CNRA for convening this panel and the panel for their expertise contributing to this thorough analysis. It's imperative to have immediate and significant funding to rapidly address 30 by 30 in the next several years, and then to have sustained and maximized funding to continue on that goal. For funding, the state can connect conservation and restoration to infrastructure funding. We can add land acquisition and sequestration as priority funding objectives of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And the state should embrace a 30 by 30 implementation bond for the 2022 ballot. Finally, having the California Nature Platform will be very beneficial to prioritize and strategize around goals, including public access for communities with poor access to parks and open space, and to protecting areas with the highest potential for carbon sequestration, as well as the highest potential for climate change adaptation, including sea level rise and extreme heat. Thank you.
Thank you. One more opportunity for Sandra Schubert. All right, let's move to our next set of speakers, please. Next, we have Wendy Sue Rosen, Heather Rodriguez, Ariana Rickard, Kara Rice, Wesley Ruderman. Wendy Sue Rosen, Heather Rodriguez, Ariana Rickard, Kira Rice, and Wesley Ruderman. Okay, it looks like we have Kira. Go ahead and unmute yourself, please, Kira.
Hi. My name's Kira Rice, and I am sort of remotely involved with the Jackson State Demonstration Forest in Mendocino County. And I wanted to reassert Beth Wurzburg's comment that state lands cannot be considered preserved by any stretch of the imagination, because Jackson State Demonstration Forest is a state park. It's a state preserve. It's a state-owned demonstration forest. There are THPs all throughout California that have been approved, THPs being timber harvest plans, that were approved in 2019 when Governor Newsom panicked about the Mendo Complex fire and the Paradise fires, where he waived all of the California Environmental Quality Act guidelines. So there are a bunch of THPs that are going through right now where big carbon sequestering trees are being cut for profit. I really appreciate Mark Henny's point about incentive versus regulations. However, the point that the woman from the Lost Coast League mentioned about the sort of supremacy of private land ownership, which is mostly forest timber companies, is they must adapt. They must adapt to our current climate issues.
Thank you for your comment, Kira. Next we have Wesley Ruderman. Go ahead and unmute yourself, please, Wesley.
Hi, good afternoon. Wes Ruderman calling on behalf of Active SGV. We are a place-based nonprofit that's focused on realizing a more sustainable and equitable San Gabriel Valley here in East Los Angeles County. First, just a quick thank you to the panelists for sharing your expertise, the opportunity to comment. We wanted to speak briefly on the opportunity to renaturalize watersheds into urban greenways in urban areas such as Southern California. Much of our region, our watershed has been paved over, but has over 100 miles of storm channels, creeks, and related areas, which also have access roads along them and offer really significant potential to become multi-benefit spaces that would support biodiversity, create wildlife corridors between some of our existing open spaces, and reduce urban heat island impacts in park poor neighborhoods. And in our area, or in our corner of the county here, we have over 2 million Californians that would be linked by that type of a greenway network to some very large open space, including the San Gabriel Mountains National Monument. I think as one of the panelists mentioned, fostering a diverse constituency for 30 by 30 and its goals is a really important goal for the long-term sustainability of the effort. We certainly hope that urban areas can still be incorporated within the implementation of the plan, and that the restoration of watersheds into greenways that support high-need local populations, our biodiversity goals, and water conservation needs can be a part of that plan. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Let's see, we'll read these names again to see if any of these folks are here. Wendy Sue Rosen, Heather Rodriguez, and Ariana Rickard. If you're here, please raise your hand or press *9 if you're on the phone and you'd like to speak. No. Okay, let's move on to our next set of speakers, please. Sofia Rafikova, Michael Popoff, Jalen Pinello, Jim Pugh, Paolo Perrone. Sofia Rafikova, Michael Popoff, Jalen Pinello, Jim Pugh, and Paolo Perrone. Please, if you hear or see your name, please raise your hand or press *9 if you're on the phone. So I see Jim is here. Jim, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, I'm Jim Pugh. I'm the Conservation Chair of the San Diego Audubon Society. I'm very encouraged by the state's 30 by 30 plans. It'll have huge benefits in so many ways. It's wonderful to think about it. I noticed the intent for balance between human access and maintaining biodiversity. In our region, we've seen a lot of habitat set aside for conservation, but badly degraded by recreational uses. It'll take considerable thought, monitoring, management, enforcement, education, and resources to make that balance successful. I really hope that the state can make it work. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Jalen Pinello. Go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jalen Pinello, and I'm a 4th year at UC Riverside and a board member with CalPERS students. I'm also a resident of the Antelope Valley, California. I wanted to show my support for the 30 by 30 plan and call attention to not only the importance of protecting our green spaces, but also making sure that the younger generation has a chance to see them. The best way to create a lasting love, passion, and understanding of the environment is to be exposed to it at a young age. As someone who grew up in South Central Los Angeles, I believe in the importance of programs that allow inner city children to go on field trips to national parks and other protected lands. There used to be more programs like this, but over the years they have dwindled. These programs are crucial for shaping young minds and allowing them to understand the importance of our lands. This education is the starting point for understanding biodiversity, the need for urban green spaces, and the importance of conservation. We must not forget about the education of the younger generation. They will be the future of the same work we are doing now. Hopefully, the Natural Resources Agency can work with the Department of Education at some point and begin reestablishing the environment into the curriculum. Thank you for all that you do and for listening to my comment.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Paolo Perrone. Paolo, please unmute yourself. Paolo?
There we go. Thanks. Just got the notice to unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, first of all, just want to thank everybody for the great effort on this. I mean, it was just exciting to hear the 30 by 30 executive order and to follow up with you all over the course of the last several months. So thank you all again. I'm a project manager with the Trust for Public Land based in Southern California, working in Los Angeles, Orange, and Ventura counties. And as a couple of our speakers mentioned earlier, it is just critical that the state allocate regular, consistent, and readily available funding for protection of critical habitats. Land is very expensive down here. real estate values are increasingly going up. As one of my colleagues previously stated, we suggested that the state use approximately 10 billion of the unprecedented budget surplus towards these goals. Our projects are largely already identified in existing state plans, whether by WCB caps or existing DFW plans, and are by and large no regrets projects. To meet this goal, we have to go big and now. The latest IPPC report suggests that we really don't have a lot of time to waste. And I just want to give credit to your existing agencies like WCB and the Resources Agency itself. They're doing a great job at protecting habitat and bringing people to the outdoors. They just need more resources. So thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment. On this slide, one more opportunity. We have Sophia Rafikova, Michael Popoff. If you're here and you'd like to speak, please raise your hand or press *9 if you're on the phone. Okay, we'll move to our next set of speakers. Radha Patel, Lysika Parrott, Devin O'Day, Marvin Norman, and Pam Nelson. Radha Patel, Lysika Parrott, Devin O'Day, Marvin Norman, Pam Nelson. If you're here, please raise your hand or press *9. I see we have Radha Patel. Go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
We're at UCLA and the State Secretary for CalPIRG students here to speak in support of the 30 by 30 goal initiative and its involvement in protecting urban lands. Mobilizing our state to protect our lands and urban green spaces are necessary to revitalize the growth of natural habitats, biodiversity, and nonetheless improve the health of many Californians. Green spaces can benefit our mental and physical health, but there are still challenges in our community preventing us from having access to them. In high school and a low-income community near South LA, I can remember hearing the staff telling us not to walk on the grass at our school nor use them to relax from a stressful week of classes. There are several barriers preventing not only students, but many Californians from having access to urban greenery on a daily basis, making the expansion of these spaces a lot more important. Among the youngest and largest generation alive, mental health is becoming more challenging every year, and the results of COVID-19 are only making it worse. Access to nature has been found to improve sleep, reduce stress, and increase happiness. The utilization of these spaces provide access to physical activity while reducing exposure to air pollutants and excessive heat. A healthy life can be addressed by preserving and including more green spaces in our local communities so Californians can take care of their well-being while continuing to fight climate change at the same time. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment. Next, we have Devin O'Day. Go ahead, Devin.
Hi there, my name's Devin O'Day. I'm the California chapter coordinator for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, a nonprofit dedicated to our wild public lands, waters, and wildlife. I'd like to emphasize some of the comments made by the panel regarding the value of citizen science projects and highlight the role that the hunting and angling community plays in the collection of data for wildlife biologists in the state. I would love to see the state expand those efforts and continue to reach out to the hunting and angling community who have intimate knowledge of landscapes and wildlife across California. This community invests billions annually to support conservation projects, and there are countless groups in the state working to support and restore habitat and wildlife corridors. Please include them in 30 by 30 discussions and look for conservation definitions that increase access and equity for all Californians seeking to provide their families with an organic, sustainable, and healthy food source. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Next, we have Marvin Norman. Marvin, if you can unmute yourself. Marvin? Go ahead. It looks like you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. There may be a problem with your microphone, Marvin. We will come back to you, Marvin. Oh, Marvin?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. I guess it doesn't work if you're on the phone properly. Yeah, Marvin Norman, policy specialist with the Center for Community Action and Environmental Justice from the Inland Valley region. And we're excited to see the progress on this plan, the 30 by 30 plan. We're especially excited because we would like to echo the comments from other speakers from Southern California. Land continues to disappear in our region really quickly, and lots of previously open spaces, which maybe were informally public or just were just not developed, are now finding themselves being turned over, and it's happening quicker, really, even than the communities can notice. And this is especially an impact for environmental justice communities and the historically underinvested communities, where these resources they're not accessible at the same rate in the first place, and then they are disappearing even faster. So we really would like to see more proactive work to be able to capture those opportunities before they disappear. And we'd also want to prioritize the fact that the EJ communities have access issues, and that part of the access issues is just proximity. So just reiterate the issue that the comments about more in the Southern California region, and making sure that they're part of the plan, and especially as the region continues to build out. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Pam Nelson. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Pam.
I am Pam Nelson, chair of a local Sierra Club group called the Santa Margarita Group in Southern California. I'm speaking as an individual, and I have some comments and questions. First, as a private landowner, I've found it difficult to donate land for conservation. There's a need for funding for organizations to both buy and maintain private lands or donated lands in perpetuity. A question I have is, will ag used for conservation be required to follow good conservation BMPs? We've seen a lot of damage from agricultural practices in our region. And I didn't see HCP managers in the summary under partners. They should be at the top of the priority, be a priority in the top of the list. And I really liked the previous comments about educating potential users of conserved lands, because currently people that recreate often abuse our public lands and don't realize the need for stewardship. And last, connectivity of conserved lands needs to be a priority. In our area, the multi-species conservation habitat plan identifies criteria areas with proposed connections, but there's no funding for road crossings or connecting important lands. So conserved lands can't be functional unless that connectivity is a priority. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Let's see, Lysica Parrott is the last one left on this list. Okay, let's move to our next set of speakers, please. We have Bill Neal, Lauren Miller, Margaret Meinke, John McCall, and Lionel Maris. Bill Neal, Lauren Miller, Margaret Meinke, John McCall, and Lionel Maris. If you are here, please raise your hand or press *9 if you're on the phone. I see Lauren Miller. Lauren, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Hi, thank you. Lauren Miller, Conservation Director with the Sierra Foothill Conservancy, a nonprofit regional land trust serving 3.5 counties. Again, thank you. I want to echo the, just the excitement that we feel about 30 by 30. I do also want to share a lot of landowner fear in the world. And I've read through your report. I'm not fearful, but I think maybe just getting some messaging out at the state level, ensuring that the landowner community knows that this is voluntary. Secondly, I want to echo Dan Silver's comments about there's great existing programs. I think about Wildlife Conservation Board's unfunded grasslands program, their unfunded rangeland program, and their unfunded oak woodlands program, all of which would be able, if those were funded, we would enable us to conserve about 12,000 acres in the next 3 years. And right now we're not able to do that because of those programs not being funded. So I think we have a lot of great existing tools, but I'm also looking forward to a lot of more innovative and equitable and more inclusive tools as well for smaller, more impactful conservation that's very proximate in rural and urban communities, that's more community conservation focused. And I'm excited to give you guys some written comment on some solutions that we have and are already working on. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder to everyone that you can submit written comments if you don't have enough time to speak, or if you didn't pre-register to speak and we run out of time, you can submit your comments by email or by phone, and we'll give that information again later. So let's see, I'll read these names again. Bill Neal, Margaret Meinke, John McCall, Lionel Maris. If any of you are here and would like to speak, please click on raise your hand or press *9 if you're on the phone. Okay, let's move on to our next set of speakers, please. We have Tyler Maderi, Jessica Loya, Erica Lovejoy, Adam Livingston, and Arthur Levine. Tyler Maderi, Jessica Loya, Erica Lovejoy, Adam Livingston, and Arthur Levine. Tyler, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Great, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to echo Dan Silver and Pam Nelson's comments. On behalf of the Western Riverside County Regional Conservation Authority, or RCA, we'd like to thank you again for your effort to engage stakeholders in the public across the state to advance 30 by 30 through the conservation of lands. Habitat conservation plans, or HCPs, and natural community conservation plans, or NCCPs, currently exist for the preservation, conservation, protection of land, species, and habitat, which allow for growing regions like Riverside County to sustainably thrive. These plans are ready, willing, and have the long-term infrastructure to acquire, restore, and uplift lands that can deliver on the state's goal to protect vital habitats and open space across the state. To that end, the Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan, or the MSHCP in Western Riverside County, is one of the largest HCPs in the nation and has planned for a 500,000 acre preserve consisting of 347,000 acres of existing public and quasi-public lands owned by federal, state, and local governments, as well as 150,000 acres of additional reserve lands, which are currently being assembled. Thanks to the existing partnerships with the Wildlife Conservation Board and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, 82% of the 500,000 acres have been preserved in Western Riverside County, with under 90,000 acres to go. With the state's increased support and investment, HCPs and NCCPs can help deliver on 30 by 30 beginning today and complete over 200 million acres of planned reserves across the state and more. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Adam Livingston.
Hi, this is Adam Livingston, Director of Planning and Policy at Sequoia Riverlands Trust and coordinator of the Southern Sierra Partnership. First, I want to thank the panel for its work. I think that echoing some previous comments, basically, I think the panel is on the right track in terms of emphasizing the importance of durability and conservation. And I'm happy to see that there was some representation from the land trust community on the panel, and it seemed like there was some understanding of the importance of permanence, that, you know, that we be sure that if we're counting something for 30 by 30, it really is conserved in the long term. We would agree about the importance of both habitat and working lands, and certainly in our region in the Southern Sierra and San Joaquin Valley, those are often overlapping or entirely coextensive. So we very much agree that both of those need to be part of the picture. The only things I would add would be the importance of both public and private lands in meeting the goal, which I think there's been some discussion of already, and the importance of funding and making all this a reality. We're very grateful for the panel's work, and Deputy Secretary Norris and your department, we're very grateful for the work you're doing. But ultimately, for all of this to count, for it to get beyond the planning and discussion stage, and for us to actually achieve this goal in the next 9 years, we need a significant and sustained increase in funding for conservation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. The rest of the names on this list, I'll read them once again. Jessica Loya, Erica Lovejoy, Arthur Levine. Okay, let's move on to our next set of speakers, please. We have Monica LaFleur, Renee Latu, Jason Landers, Brian Kalaji, and Susan Kirks. Monica LaFleur, Renee Latu, Jason Landers, Brian Kalaji, and Susan Kirks. Okay, I see Monica LaFleur. Go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Thank you. This is Monica LaFleur, California Program Associate with Defenders of Wildlife. Thank you to the Natural Resources Agency for hosting this workshop. To seize the opportunity provided by the 30 by 30 initiative, we must adopt a strong definition of conservation that includes actively managing and protecting with enduring measures spaces that satisfy high biodiversity values, climate resiliency, and access to nature for all. We must look to working lands, including rangelands and agricultural areas, to help us reach our goal. These land types can be managed over the long term to protect biodiversity and still serve the communities they support. To incorporate these non-protected areas into our 30 by 30 strategy, we must increase funding for acquisitions of inholdings and durable conservation of private lands with willing landowners. Finally, many areas in California have been seriously degraded and are in critical need of restoration. For example, California has lost 99% of its riparian areas and more than 90% of its wetlands. In urban areas, industrial pollution, diversion of rivers and streams, and rampant development, as well as failure to prioritize open space and parks for people and nature, have led to loss of those spaces. There needs to be significant emphasis placed on restoring degraded landscapes in addition to protecting intact landscapes. By working inclusively across the state on both public and private lands, we will surely be able to reach our goal. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Renee Latu. Renee, go ahead and unmute yourself, please. Renee, you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Can you check your microphone and your settings, please? Renee, we're unable to hear you. We will come back to you, Renee, and if you need tech support, you can send a message in the chat, but we'll come back to you, Renee. Next, we have Susan Kirks. Susan, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Thank you. I just have to pull up my comment. Thank you. My name is Susan Kirks. I'm the president of Madrone Audubon Society in Sonoma County, And I also lead Paula Lane Action Network, focused on open space and habitat preservation and American badger research and education. The Department of Fish and Wildlife needs an expansion of funding and staffing for conservation to make the 30 by 30 program work. I agree with Nina Roberts' comments about the importance of citizen science or community science, also shared in your recent biodiversity workshop by the Cal Academy of Sciences representative. Working lands, grasslands are often the only available area for American badger to survive. Ranchers kill badgers with the fear of cows stepping into badger holes. Habitat loss and fragmentation and vehicle strikes result in badger mortality. We need to educate ranchers and landowners, dispel myths, and support coexistence of conservation and other land uses. Please bring farm animal sanctuaries, purchasing and conserving land for sanctuaries into your plans. These sanctuaries are important to provide transition from animal-based agriculture to plant-based. American badger, a special status mammal, needs to be removed from the Department of Fish and Wildlife's approved hunting list. That would also support conservation. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts.
Thanks for your comment. We're going to go back to Renee. Uh-oh, I just lost Renee. Renee, can you raise your hand again, please? Great, thank you. You disappeared from my list. Okay, Renee, go ahead. You should be unmuted. You may want to check your microphone setting. And if you're both on the phone and on the computer, you will need to probably get rid of one and just use the other. We will try you again. You can check your mic setting by clicking the up arrow by the microphone icon. And make sure that you have the right microphone on. We'll come back to you again, Renee. Let's see. Jason Landers, Brian Kalaji, are you here? Renee, are you able to speak? I'm so sorry about that, Renee. We'll try you again later. And again, you can text our tech support folks, or you can give them a call at, not text them, send a message in the chat, or you can call them at 858-522-9702, and Jasmine will help you troubleshoot. Okay. Let's go to our next set of speakers, please. We have Angela Kemsley, Carla Kellums, Susan Karasoff, Doug Johnson, and Sarah Husby. Angela Kemsley, Carla Kellums, Susan Karasoff, Doug Johnson, and Sarah Husby. Okay, I see Susan Karasoff. Susan, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Hi, this is Susan Karasoff with the San Francisco chapter of the California Native Plant Society. Thank you so much for all your good work on 30 by 30. To quickly begin to enhance biodiversity statewide in managed spaces, please consider directing California state money used for greening to require that 100% local native plants are installed as a required biodiversity co-benefit to qualify for state greening funding. These funds do not currently have any biodiversity co-benefit, so the state is spending money on greening that isn't locally native, so it does not support biodiversity. State funds that are missing a biodiversity co-benefit include, but are unfortunately not limited to, California Climate Investments, the Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program, the State Coastal Conservancy, California State Park Land and Water Conservation Fund, and CAL FIRE. Please also require using only 100% local native plants in all the state green spaces, for example, the State Capitol Park, to enhance local biodiversity. Please prioritize invasive plant removal across all of our plant communities to permit biodiversity to be restored. Please conserve inland waters such as creeks, riparian areas, aquifers, lakes, and ponds to help mitigate climate change in addition to enhancing biodiversity. And please preserve our deserts and grasslands. Prevent large solar projects from damaging or destroying that rare biodiversity.
Thank you.
Focus. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Doug Johnson. Doug, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Hi, this is Doug Johnson, director of the nonprofit California Invasive Plant Council. And thank you both and panel for taking input and for your work on this exciting effort. The conservation of California's lands and waters requires the control of invasive species, which degrade biodiversity, increase wildfire fuels, decrease water availability, and reduce recreation for everyone in California. The UN Convention on Biological Diversity proposes a goal of at least 50% of all high priority invasive species populations getting addressed by the year 2030. That's a pretty tall order, but it matches the severity and urgency of the problem. California is one of the world's biodiversity hotspots and strongest economies, so we can be leaders at the forefront of this work, and 30 by 30 gives us that opportunity. But we do need to recognize that we can consider lands and waters to be conserved only if the invasive species damaging those places are being controlled. The work of controlling invasive species requires diverse jurisdictions and stakeholders to work together at the landscape scale. And the good news is that over the last 20 years, a network for the coordinated work on invasive species has formed in counties across the state. Unfortunately, this network does not currently have the state funding that made it effective in the past. Investing in this work is important to the success of the 30 by 30 initiative. And I had more, but I'll submit it in an email. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for your comment. Next, we have Sarah Husby. Go ahead, Sarah, and unmute yourself.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Sarah Husby. I'm with the Central Sierra Environmental Resource Center, also known as CSERC. The state has engaged citizen stakeholders in this process with the promise of advancing conservation, but the advisory panel report appears to twist the meaning of conservation to spin it to prioritize the panelists' views that favor use over environmental protection. The advisory panel denounces preservation and no net loss strategies as supposedly inhibiting human stewardship of the land. This is the kind of extreme view that has resulted in so much exploitation and ecological degradation up to this point. Preservation, such as federal land wilderness areas, can be fully consistent with applying beneficial fire, allowing highly valued recreation, protecting wildlife, enhancing water quality, and achieving other social and economic goals. The advisory panel report reads like a treatise denouncing reserve or ecological protection, and instead it promotes multi-benefit land use. This spin of what qualifies as conserved land appears intended to financially incentivize commercial agriculture and intensive uses rather than providing long-term protection for vulnerable lands and waters in the state. Those who have trusted the state to produce a visionary outcome will likely feel betrayed if this panel's report reflects the true intent of 30 by 30. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, I think we have Renee Latu. If Renee, the last four digits of your phone number are 1215. So I am asking you to unmute, so please press *6 and you should be able to speak.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you for your patience. Okay, my name is Renee Latu and I'm from Southern California, Edison. And over the last 10 years, SE spent over $60 million in conserving lands by way of mitigation, which is required by several state agencies. With conservation becoming increasingly important in the state, it's essential for permittees like us to have options when mitigating for projects. We need to have certainty, durability, streamlined processes, and agencies that are adequately staffed to handle their workload. So we have a couple of suggestions. One, approve, accept more multi-use protection mechanisms instead of the traditional conservation easements. MOUs that identify specific land use practices that encourage conservation as mitigation. Also, would love to see set up institutions, funds, endowments, or accounts that allows for permittees like us to pay into a fund and let the scientists figure out how to, acquire and conserve lands. And then I'd also like to give a shout out to California Department of Fish and Wildlife. They have a certified mitigation banking program that, when running efficiently, is successful. When we have banks in Southern California, makes it easier for us to achieve our PUC goals. Unfortunately, they're low on staff, causing delays. So I'd like to just echo what everyone else was saying. Allocating the right size funding for this effort is key to success. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I'm glad we got to hear it. Left on this slide is Angela Kemsley and Carla Kellums. If you'd like to speak, please press the raise hand button or press *9 if you're on the phone. Okay, let's move on to our next set of speakers, please. We have Vicki Hoover, David Hogan, Corinne High, Tom Hicks, and Pedro Hernandez. Vicki Hoover, David Hogan, Corinne High, Tom Hicks, Pedro Hernandez. Okay, Corinne or Karen, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Karen High, Ohlone Audubon Society and Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge. Thank you for all your efforts on 30 by 30. I'm totally support all the calls for additional funding to implement 30 by 30 and also the need to conserve tidal wetland migration pathways. But right now I want to speak about the recently released Conservation of Lands document, which refers to the CPAD map. And the reference to this map raises concerns about how conserved lands will be identified. It's crucial that conserved lands are not designated based solely upon state or federal ownership, as you have heard. Instead, these lands should and must be evaluated to assess whether proposed or permitted activities or land management practices have adverse impacts on ecosystem function, result in habitat fragmentation or degradation, or adversely impact biodiversity and recovery of listed species. Tesla Park, as you've heard earlier, is in eastern Alameda County. It's a glaring example of the problem of relying solely on the CPAD mapping. It's threatened by OHV expansion. It has cultural resources, biodiversity out the wazoo. It ticks all the 30 by 30 boxes and has overwhelming local and regional support for permanent conservation and protection. So please reassess how these lands will be designated as conserved. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I will read the names on this slide again. Vicki Hoover, David Hogan, Tom Hicks, Pedro Hernandez. Okay, let's move to our next. Oh, I see Tom Hicks. Tom, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Just really appreciate being here today. I'm a solar practitioner, a public interest attorney calling in on behalf of Trout Unlimited and its Western Water and Habitat Program. I report to a woman named Laura Zemer based in Bozeman, Montana. We're working with the IRS to clarify the federal tax deductibility of gifts of water rights. I know that depending on who you talk to on different days, the balance between regulatory and voluntary conservation transactions There's a lot of history there, but I would think that the 30 by 30 initiative provides a very important pathway to look at financial incentives, such as federal tax deductions for gifts of water rights. Again, California's Department of General Services is well versed in appraisal issues, but between the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I'm thinking of the California Wildlife Conservation Board and their Prop 1 funding for projects that enhance stream flow, most specifically acquisition of water rights that can protect key habitat and in-stream flow values. There's a real opportunity there, and I would just put it out there that any opportunity that anyone in the audience or yourselves can provide to perhaps weigh in with the federal agencies on a so-called IRS revenue ruling would have immediate federal tax support for any projects here in California. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comment. I'll read the names on this list on this slide again. Vicki Hoover, Tom Hicks, oh, I'm sorry. Vicki Hoover, David Hogan, Pedro Hernandez. Okay, let's move to our next slide, please. Ryan Henson, Pamela Hetherington, Micah Hessergian, Marcia Hanscom, David Gurney. Ryan Henson, Pamela Hetherington, Micah Hessergian, Marcia Hanscom, and David Gurney. All right, let's start with Ryan Henson. Ryan, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Hi, good evening, and thank you to the CNRA and to the great panel. Really appreciate it. And I've spent, I'm sorry, I'm the policy director for California Wilderness Coalition, or Cal Wild, and I live in Shasta County, but I have the great opportunity to work statewide. And I've spent a lifetime trying to get the Bureau of Land Management and U.S. Forest Service to improve their management of old growth forest and remaining wild places and things like that. And I just hope that, and I have seen them greatly improve their management over the years. And I'd like, before I go out in a pine box, to really see them become agencies that preserve old growth forest, what little remains, and preserve our roadless areas, our remaining wild places. And so I hope we don't put the BLM and the Forest Service in the win column for 30 by 30 too quickly. And I hope we can use it as a process to really encourage those agencies, especially under the Biden administration, to move in the right direction. And so I just, and there are some important planning processes for both agencies coming up, plans that'll last for 15 or 20 years. And it'd be great if the if the state could get involved in those plans from a 30 by 30 perspective to push them in a good direction. And you could do this without being oppositional. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Pamela Hetherington. Pamela, go ahead and unmute, please.
I'm unmuted and I'm going to assume that you can hear me.
Yes.
I am Pam Hetherington from the Environmental Center of San Diego. And thank you, all of you, even the ones in the background, for hosting these workshops. I'd like to encourage you to start by assessing your inventory that is already considered protected, conserved, or reserved, but lacks funding to actually protect these lands. You'll learn a lot about uses on conserved and preserved lands that can apply to many of the conservation efforts addressed in the 30 by 30 initiative. And that's what I'll say right now. We're fortunate at the Environmental Center to coordinate quarterly meetings with both the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Cal Fish and Wildlife, and are able to discuss projects in San Diego. So it's a good model. It incorporates everybody. There's 30 plus organizations that show up at these meetings. We also host an environmental leadership summit where we get at least 100 people participating, talking about local efforts. So those are the type of models you may want to look at, and I'd be happy to supply more information. But thank you for doing this, and please, everybody get out and vote. We need 30 by 30. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Marcia Hanscom. Marcia.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Marcia Hanscom, Sierra Club Iona Wetlands Chair and Executive Committee of the Angeles chapter of the club. In 2003, I sat in then Governor Gray Davis' office with our Sierra Club Sacramento staff as a recall election was overshadowing the state. That day, we finalized details on a $140 million land deal that was meant to protect the Iona wetlands and other fragile habitats on the LA coast. Now that land is a state Iona Wetlands Ecological Reserve. At this reserve, there are 7 endangered species relying on the land and more than 20 species that are on the state's list of species of special concern. This land is considered to be a sacred site to Indigenous tribal leaders. So we urge this 30 by 30 effort to strongly review plans like the one currently supported by the state at the Iona Wetlands and make sure they are truly nature-based solutions, as the governor has called for. It's not conservation to erase a mosaic of habitats that provide food and shelter for imperiled species and try to create something new there. That's not conservation. It's a construction project masquerading as a restoration, especially when there is so much carbon being stored and sequestered there now. There also are lands on the edges that have some willing sellers now, and we would like the state to encourage the emergence of willing sellers there. So we protect this land and the wildlife corridors that are needed by the rare wildlife in existence. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I'll read these names again. Micah Hasergian and David Gurney. Are you here? Okay, let's move to our next set of speakers, please. We have Lexi Griddlefeld, Shane Green, Kent Granny, Amy Granat, and Lisa Gover. Lexi Griddlefeld, Shane Green, Kent Graney, Amy Granat, and Lisa Gover. Amy, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Amy Granite with the California Off-Road Vehicle Association. And I'm going to be a little bit different from most of your speakers here. This whole concept and the land included in the initiative, it really runs the risk of being weaponized against communities. And the California Natural Resources Agency needs to be very careful. You had some very good panelists. I did not see my community. I did not see myself mirrored in their comments or their wishes. We're anywhere from 8 to 11 million, a $20 billion industry in California, and yet we're being ignored. And not only that, the 30 by 30 initiative has brought out some really demeaning comments against people who use the land. We have higher standards in our state parks than any other state parks in the entire system, and yet people want to steal our state parks, as in the non-existent Tesla Park, which is actually part of Carnegie State Vehicular Recreation Area. Please talk to us. Please engage us. We're a big community. We do a lot of work on the ground, and we do a lot of volunteerism. Stewardship is very important to us, and we want to be part of the solution, but not if the state is going to engage in demeaning comments to our community. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I'll read these names on this slide again. Lexi Griddlefeld, Shane Green, Kent Granny, Lisa Gover. Okay, At this point, we have a number of speakers left, and we want to make sure that we give our listeners, as well as our tech support folks, as well as you all, a break if you need it. So we are going to take a 10-minute break, and we will return at 5:45 to hear the remaining speakers. If we could briefly show the next speaker list just before the break so that folks can see if they're next. Maybe I asked for that too late. I don't know if it's possible. Is it possible to show the list of the next 5 speakers real quick before the break? So we'll leave this up for a minute, and then we'll put the break slide up again. We will return at 5:45 with this list of speakers coming next. We're in the G's now. So if you can't see it, just know that we're in the G's. So feel free to do whatever you need to do, and we'll be coming back with more public comments at 5:45. And at that point, my co-facilitator, Cece, will take over. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good break. We are going to continue with public input. My name is Cece Vu. I will be taking over facilitating this latter portion of our public input. As you might know, we are close to 6 o'clock, but we still have a number of speakers left who have registered. So we will stay until we've taken all of our pre-registered speakers. And if we have time, we'll take a few unregistered speakers, but we don't want to keep our panelists and our staff too late tonight, and you all as well. So we'd like to jump right in now and take the next 5 speakers. And I see a hand up already, but I will repeat the names. And if you hear your name or see your name, please raise your hand. *9 if you're on the phone. So we have Daniel Glusenkamp, Jock Gilchrist, Richard Ginger, Celeste Garamendi, and Mike Garabedian. One more time, Daniel Glusenkamp, Jock Gilchrist, Richard Ginger, Celeste Garamendi, and Mike Garabedian. Okay, so I see Daniel Glusenkamp. Going to ask you, Daniel, to unmute and provide your comment, please.
Hi, I'm Dan Gleason-Camp with the California Institute for Biodiversity. I want to echo what a whole bunch of other people have said and just give a hearty thanks to everyone who's working on this, all the folks on screen and then the many more behind the scenes, making this happen and pushing it forward during really incredible times. And it, it's really a super exciting process and a really great opportunity. And I just got a call from a friend who told me to make it clear that this, where this came from, that this was driven by math done by famous scientists, E.O. Wilson and Robert MacArthur, who determined that we needed to save about 50% of planet Earth to save about 80% of the species. 30 by 30 is California's effort to get toward 50%, and the focus on that initially was biodiversity, saving species. With the executive order, Governor Newsom made it about climate resilience and climate protection as well, which of course brings in a whole lot of need in urban areas, because we're all going to be relying on conserved lands to stay healthy during times of climate change. I'm concerned that we are conflating several different things: biodiversity, equitable access to nature within our cities, working landscapes, row cropping agriculture. We're putting all these things together and trying to, come up with a product that serves all of those. And my fear is that it will serve none of them well. We absolutely need to save lands for biodiversity. We also need to save lands to make sure that we have equitable communities, and they're different things. And so we need to invest in urban parks. We need to save those lands that school districts are going to sell.
I'm going to have to ask you to stop your comment there, just to be fair with other speakers. Your time is up. Thank you very much for your comment. Okay, and Jock Gilchrist, you are up next. I will ask you to unmute now, please, and provide your comment.
Hello, I'm assuming you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect, thank you. My name is Jock Gilchrist, and I'm the Research and Initiative Manager at the Climate Center. Thank you for hearing our comments today and for your work to advance conservation objectives in California. The Climate Center believes that a definition of land conservation should include the restoration of carbon stocks to natural and working lands. Forests, agricultural lands, coastal wetlands, montane meadows, and riparian habitat are settings that historically stored large quantities of carbon, much of which has been lost due to human activity. The concept of conservation should include the importance of carbon restoration, not as a sole focus, but as a vital ingredient. Conservation that sequesters carbon and reduces the loss of carbon can help California meet and accelerate its climate change mitigation targets. In addition, the co-benefits are immense and include cleaner air, more biodiversity, more productive cropland, and perhaps most importantly, improved water storage. California's 4th climate assessment found that just a 1.5 increase in soil organic carbon across the state's 47 million acres of working lands would store an additional 4.6 million acre-feet of water, which not only benefits our water supplies, but makes vegetation less flammable. We encourage the Natural Resources Agency to incorporate carbon sequestration into its conservation definition and targets as it advances the 30 by 30 directive. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your comment, Jacques. Next up, we have Celeste Garamendi. Celeste, go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Thank you. Again, my name is Celeste Garamendi. I am with Friends of Tesla Park, which is part of an alliance working to preserve the 3,100-acre Tesla parkland in eastern Alameda County as a natural and cultural preserve and non-motorized park. As others have mentioned, Tesla Park is under immediate threat from being converted from its vital intact ecosystem, critical linkage habitat corridor, culturally significant landscape to OHV and motorized recreation as an expansion of Carnegie SVRA. What makes Tesla relevant here is that it is state parkland. Tesla demonstrates, as Karen High mentioned, that state public land does not mean the land is protected necessarily. That access for all should not mean that it's access for all uses in all places, and that there are actions that the state should take now to ensure it's not only to ensure that it's meeting 30 by 30 standards, but is also serving as a model. We believe that there are some places where damaging OHV recreation simply shouldn't be allowed, and Tesla is one of those places. Similarly, there are areas where OHV recreation is allowed that should not be considered as protected under the 30 by 30 targets. Tesla Park obviously should not be open to OHV recreation, and we ask that the state act now to preserve Tesla Park as a non-motorized nature and cultural preserve. And we also caution that 30 by 30 not be co-opted to increase uses and impacts in the name of access that undermine the very purpose of conservation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Celeste. Next, we have Michael Garabedian. Michael, I'm going to ask you to unmute and provide your comment, please.
Thank you so much. This is Mike Garabedian. I live in Placer County, but I'm calling to call attention to the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan, an HCP and CCP, which is over 1/5 of the state of California, 22 million acres. This is, in the 48 states, one of the largest, if not the largest, remaining areas of native vegetation. It is being fragmented now for the first time ever, first time any serious threat to this area by solar energy development. This needs to be recognized. This needs to be addressed. It is not being adequately addressed in the DRECP. We need to figure out how to get to ecosystem level protection and landscape level protection. And this program will hopefully help us get on the way to doing that. Thank you for all of your help and work on this. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Mike, for your comment. We have Richard Ginger. Richard, go ahead and please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Okay.
Richard, are you there?
I am muted.
Okay, Richard, are you there?
I'm unmuted. You can't hear me. I've unmuted several times.
We can hear you now, Richard. It might have been a delay or something.
Okay, very good. I'd like to draw to your attention a comment I sent in on August 3rd about the climate in 3030. Is that there's so much work being done on a lot of different levels, what you all are doing, as well as the Forest Management Task Force and its successor with all these high-minded processes. And my experience in forest practices and watershed work for 1492 is supposed to make a whole other level of public participation and transparency, and it's not happening. I'd like you to go back and look at the California Appeals Court decision, EPIC, and the International Indian Treaty Council against CDF and Georgia Pacific. And that decision in 1985 pointed out that CAL FIRE was supposed to, and it was not considering or responding to cumulative effects, was not adequately consulting with Native Americans or Native American tribes, and not assuring Californians that the Native American heritage is being protected. And a lot of that needs to be expressed and brought forward right now. These things can be done now, whether it's in Rainbow Ridge in the Mattole, whether it's along the Sinkyoni Wilderness Coast, you saw Redwood Forest, or whether it's in Jackson. There needs to be a 2-year moratorium in Jackson we need to get forestry together moving forward.
Richard, your time is up, and hello, Richard.
It's for large trees, and that's
Richard.
Yep. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to
Yes.
stop you there. And thank you for your comment.
I said it was fine. Oh yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Team, can I have the next group of speakers, please? Okay. We have Juan Pablo Galvin Martinez, Brenda Gallegos, Maureen Forney, Pat Flanagan, and Arthur Feinstein. One more time, we have Juan Pablo Galvin Martinez, Brenda Gallegos, Maureen Forney, Pat Flanagan, and Arthur Feinstein. Okay, it looks like we have Juan Pablo Galvin Martinez. Please provide your comment.
Good afternoon. My name is Juan Pablo Galvan Martinez, Senior Land Use Manager for Save Mount Diablo. Just like to thank CNRA staff and the panelists and everyone that has participated in this process so far. We're very excited for 30 by 30. And our namesake, organizational namesake, is basically an icon signifying home for millions of people in the East San Francisco Bay Area. But it's actually just the northernmost point of the entire Diablo range, stretching to Southern California. As far as 30 by 30 goes, this area represents 3 key things: a home for dozens of rare species, an ideal north-south corridor for plant and animal migration in the face of climate change, and also an interesting test bed for multiple uses and the definition of conservation. As several other speakers have made clear, there's a pinch point called the Tesla Park area between Livermore and Tracy that is under threat from off-road recreation. We would find it highly questionable to define a conserved land as being under off-road vehicle use, and would consider, even if the land was owned by state parks, if threatened by off-road use, that this land is not conserved, but threatened. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you, Juan Pablo, for your comment. Next up, we have Pat Flanagan. Pat, please unmute yourself and provide your comment. Pat, we can't hear you. Did you call in on a phone line too, Pat? And if you did, maybe you can chat us the last 4 digits of your number. Okay, Pat, we can't hear you. Maybe our team can help Pat. Pat will come back to you, okay? All right, so another chance for Brenda Gallegos, Maureen Forney, and Arthur Feinstein. And if you're on the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand. Oh, it looks like, Pat, you're unmuted. Okay, we'll have our team help you with the audio issues. Okay, next 5 speakers, please. Okay, we have Abigail Bateman, Christina Fabula, Julie Evans, Andrew Escamilla, and Jamie Irvin. Abigail Bateman, Christina Fabula, Julie Evans, Andrew Escamilla, and Jamie Irvin. And I see Abigail. Abigail, go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comment, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Abigail Fateman. I am the Executive Director of the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservancy and a member of the California Habitat Conservation Planning Coalition. I want to address the questions of how do we define conservation and how do we work together to achieve it, as posed in the original slide of this workshop. I recommend that we look at California's highly successful existing regional conservation programs. Specifically, I want to highlight Natural Community Conservation Plans, or NCCPs. These plans are developed by the state with local partners and are approved by CDFW and implemented locally. These plans are regional in scale, science-based, developed with a rigorous stakeholder process, designed and funded to adaptively manage land and to do so in perpetuity, address not only avoidance of extinction, but also recovery of special status species, work with willing land sellers, and permanently protect land. These attributes of NCCP conservation actions can be used as a gold standard for conservation as metrics for 30 by 30 conservation. I believe that the most important thing we can do right now is to move quickly to acquire and manage land to prevent loss of biodiversity. There needs to be funding for both of these activities, acquisition and management. In the short term and perhaps the longer term, I recommend that the state looks to adopted plans like NCCPs to start immediately funding and realizing 30 by 30 priorities. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you for your comment, Abigail. Okay, do we have Christina Fabula, Julie Evans, Andrew Escamilla, or Jamie Irvin? Here we go. I see Julie Evans. Julie, go ahead and unmute and provide your comment, please.
Hi, thank you, Resources Agency panel and facilitators. I am the California Native Plant Society's Vegetation Program Director, and I'd love to highlight what many others have said today. One is just in defining conservation, I would see that it would include from conserving biodiversity at the species, to the subspecies or genetic diversity within species, to natural communities or vegetation types, to ecosystems, and conservation for on land and coastal water resources, as well as addressing things such as soil stability, carbon storage, and limiting green energy projects on natural landscapes. I'll provide a lot more comments in writing, though, as many have said, I think we need to put a significant amount more money into acquisition and restoration of conservation lands, especially with the budget surplus and just ongoing for decades to come. I think that engaging private landowners and land managing agencies in those efforts, and not just focusing on the already conserved lands. And then engaging nonprofits and local land trusts and consortiums of academic groups, since we're very nimble and creative and effective at interacting across many sectors of staff, students, volunteers, to help achieve 30 by 30 goals. And thanks.
Thank you, Julie, for your comment. And do we have Pat yet? Before we move to our next list of speakers? Okay, we're still troubleshooting with Pat. Right, team, can we move to our next list of speakers, please? Okay, we have Joseph Duvivier. Okay, I think Danny said he wasn't going to provide a comment. Jerry Desmond, Allison Dahlman, and Chance Cutrano. So we have Joseph Duvivier, Jerry Desmond, Allison Dahlman, and Chance Cutrano. Looks like we have Jerry Desmond here. Jerry, go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comment, please.
Hello, agency. This is Jerry Desmond on behalf of Recreational Boaters of California, a nonprofit advocacy organization in our 51st year to promote the protection and enhancement of the state's waterways. And we support the principles outlined in the governor's executive order on 30 by 30, including the goals of protecting and enhancing biodiversity in terrestrial, aquatic, and marine habitats by the year 2030. From our engagement on the water, we can acknowledge firsthand the tremendous challenges that are being identified and addressed through the workshops, including today's discussion. Indeed, several of the concepts and principles in today's advisory panel presentation identify items that are essential and provide opportunities for the long-term success of these efforts. These include the enhancement of inclusion and equitable access, together with a process that emphasizes engagement and collaboration. As the strategy is being developed for the 30 by 30 initiative, we encourage a number of approaches, include a recognition of the positive role of on-the-water recreation, including boating, and conservation goals that recognize and include lands and waters already conserved in public trust by state, federal, or local law or regulation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, for your comment. I see, is Pat here with us?
No.
Oh, is that you, Pat?
Did you hear me?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Can hear you.
Any sense? Okay. Pat lives in the Morongo Basin between Joshua Tree National Park and the Marine Base. I look 70 miles to the east and across land that is private, that is BLM, that is, and my neighbors immediately to the west on a few acres are the BLM and Southern Cal Edison. This is an example of what goes on in the Mojave Desert, where you have had the Small Tracts Act and you have these small acreages. Back in 2012, a major initiative was to put together conservation priorities and to publish a report, which I will send you. And what it did is it looked at 5 conservation values that emerged as protecting the mission of Joshua Tree National Park, protecting the mission of the Marine Base, wildlife connectivity and habitat, maintaining community identity, and protecting community views and treasures. The value of this is that it really opened up the ability to protect areas. In some cases, there's definitely money to protect the working needs of both the National Park and the Marine Base. So I will send you this document, or link to it, and you will see how it was done. But it was very effective, and it is currently mapped. And you can go to any parcel in the, let me see, 528,000 acres and see the values. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat, for that. And I'm glad you finally got to provide your comment. Next up, we have Allison Dahlman. Allison, go ahead and unmute and provide your comment, please.
Can you hear me? Hi.
Yes, we can. Yes.
I'm Dr. Allison Dahlman, volunteer for the Center for Biological Diversity. Habitat loss and degradation remains the largest driver of extinction, ecosystem failure, and undermines our life support systems, including pollination, water purification, oxygen production, and disease regulation. We must establish new state wildlife refuges and marine monuments to protect remaining habitats and biodiversity across California. We should develop an ecosystem approach to the recovery of endangered species, requiring all agencies to implement ecosystem conservation strategies to facilitate connectivity and repair the underlying damage caused by human impacts. Public lands have significant potential to mitigate the impacts of climate change and maintain healthy wildlife populations, but multiple use management has resulted in their abuse for the benefit of the fossil fuel and logging industries and other damaging private interests. People have already converted 70% of the world's ice-free land to agriculture, livestock, and urban development. One of the most effective solutions for reversing biodiversity loss and protecting human health is the establishment of protected areas to limit destructive human activities. Thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate you guys doing this. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Allison, for your comment. Okay, we have Chance Cutrano. Chance, go ahead and unmute and provide your comment, please.
Great, thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Chance Catrano. I'm the Director of Programs at the Resource Renewal Institute, which is a think and do tank in the San Francisco Bay Area. I just wanted to thank the advisory panel in the report for citing rice fields as a potential working landscape that can be embedded within larger landscapes to ensure the ecological functionality of the Central California Valley ecoregion. We support the development of additional incentive programs and regional collaboratives that can integrate waterfowl and wetland conservation efforts with efforts to conserve and restore listed and native fish species as well, such as the Resource Renewal Institute's Fish in the Fields program and the Nagiri Project, which is now managed by California Trout. And as we layer conservation initiatives, we believe we can achieve even greater stewardship that will bolster 30 by 30 efforts. Switching gears, while we support innovative partnerships to achieve biodiversity targets and linkages across private and public landscapes, we also believe restoration of ecological integrity should begin in national and state parks, the ecologically unique reserves where we can ensure the durability and oversight of conservation management. We've seen state and federal agencies fail to adequately oversee and enforce the conservation of wildlife and other public trust assets due to lack of financial means. Point Reyes National Seashore is a clear example as a GAP 1 area that has serious degradation of water, air, and wildlife due to ongoing cattle ranching. So we want to make sure financial resources go to those places first as we tackle 30 by 30. Thank you.
Thank you, Chance, for providing your comment. And I just want to remind speakers, for the benefit of our non-English participants, to, as best you can, balance slowing down a little bit and, within the time that you're allotted. Okay, I think Joseph Duvivier, just one last chance. If you're on the phone, *9. Otherwise, we're going to move on to our next list of speakers, please. Okay, next group, please. Okay, we have Hugh Cox, Bill Cooper, Angelina Cook, Brandon Contreras, and Moises Cisneros. Hugh Cox, Bill Cooper, Angelina Cook, Brandon Contreras, and Moises Cisneros. Okay, we're gonna get Hugh here unmuted so you can provide your comment, Hugh.
Okay, thank you. I'm Hugh Cox. I'm a project manager for the Trust for Public Land. And I'd like to say thanks to the panel for the excellent report, which provides an insightful summary of conservation issues and interests, and also the trade-offs necessary to address them across landscapes of many scales and types. There are three themes from the report that I'd like to emphasize. The first is 3030 should not be viewed as a one-decade project extending only to 2030. The report recommends that conservation be durable over the long term. So keeping long-term goals in mind for conservation and nature-based climate solutions beyond 2030 is a necessary shift in how we live and work in the state. Secondly, the report recommends there be adequate investment for conservation across all land categories, and that the state work to identify funding streams to support conservation efforts. It's absolutely necessary to commit to regular, predictable, and robust funding reflective of the priority that land conservation and nature-based climate solutions needs to be. Finally, the report recommends community engagement and partnerships to achieve funding and action through many participants across sectors, government, nonprofit, and private. It's critically important that this effort facilitate those partnerships to elevate and address what's an existential matter that is in everybody's interest to solve. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh, for your comment. Okay, we have Moises Cisneros. Moises, go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comment, please. Moises, can you unmute yourself? There we go. Moises, you are unmuted. it looks like. We're having some tech issues today. All right, Moises, if you called in via phone, could you let us know what the last 4 digits of your phone number is? Let our tech support team know. If not, maybe they can help you troubleshoot the microphone like we did with our other participant. Okay. We're gonna move on. Let's see, do we have Bill Cooper, Angelina Cook, or Brandon Contreras? Okay. We'll come back to you, Moises, but we're going to move on to our next list of speakers until we get your issue troubleshooted. Okay. Richard Charter, Sandra Cattell, Linda Castro, Alan Carlton, and Adam Cantor. Richard Charter, Sandra Cattell, Linda Castro, Alan Carlton, and Adam Cantor. And it looks like we have Richard Charter. Richard, go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comment.
My name is Richard Charter, and I want to thank you for your work on nature-based solutions and get you off to dinner as quickly as possible. You have before you a set of potential terrestrial and marine solutions filled with promising new tools, including on land, creative conservation easements with willing private owners, migration corridor enhancements, riparian buffer zones, and strong public support for the creation of new parklands, plus additions to existing parks. In our coastal waters, you can build on our state's 4 existing national marine sanctuaries and at least 1 more now in progress, and you can strengthen and not undermine our unique system of Marine Life Protection Act MPAs in our state waters. With all due respect, it should be obvious that obsolete, cruel, anticoagulant ecosystem poisons that result in the unnecessary protracted suffering of non-target species have no place in 30 by 30. As is clearly reflected in the governor's signature of AB 1788 this year and in the legislative history that led up to this law. You are very fortunate to now have a multi-decade legacy of bipartisan baseline conservation measures that could provide a strong foundation on which to build a true 30 by 30 outcome, both onshore and offshore, unless this process becomes diverted onto a path toward undermining it by poisoning ecosystems. The damage nationwide to the 30 by 30 movement would be incalculable. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Richard, for your comment. I'm going to check back in with Moises. Moises, are you able to speak? All right. Moving on, we'll come back to you. So we have Sandra Cattell. Sandra, go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Thank you. Sandra Cattell with the Sierra Club Angeles chapter. We have many goals and many types of lands that we would like to see preserved, but funding for acquisition is absolutely essential. There are some large land areas like Diamond Bar that are missing critical links to be an effective wildlife corridor. We need funding for acquisition. We'd love to see restoration of places like the degraded Inglewood oil fields back to the beautiful rolling hills I remember from my childhood. It needs funding. There's a small property in Santa Clarita, the Hondo property, that lies between already preserved open spaces. Once home to an oil refinery, purchase and restoration would preserve a critical wildlife corridor and a freeway undercrossing connection. We need small neighborhood acquisitions in park-poor neighborhoods like Bell, Commerce, and Southgate. We need funding to purchase these private lands. We have several wetlands that need expansion using adjacent lands. We need funding for acquisitions. The openness of the desert can be deceptive. Much of what is private land is available for development or exploitation. Large swaths of land need to be purchased and preserved. We need dedicated funding from the state for these purchases. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Okay, do we have Moises Cisneros able to talk now? Okay. Alan Carlton, please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
My name's Alan Carlson. I'm with the Sierra Club. As has been said before, but I want to repeat, 30 by 30 is doing a good job of identifying lands that need protection. And I think that process can continue, but the funding is the problem. And I think the way the governor can convince us that he's serious about 30 by 30 is including a budget item line in the next year's budget for 30 by 30. There's a state surplus. And what we need is to have a budget line of funding for 30 by 30 that can be used to acquire private land and other ways. That's how we're going to get someplace once we've identified the areas to protect with protecting any private land. It just takes money and it should be in the budget. I just have one comment with regard to ORVs. They're antithetical to anything trying to be done by 30 by 30. They tear up the land, keep other people from using it, and pollute the air. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, for your comment. Okay, do we have Linda Castro or Adam Cantor one last time? Okay, let's move on to our next list. And while we do that, I'm going to check back in with Moises Cisneros. Moises, our tech team is trying to connect with you on chat to help you troubleshoot your audio. Okay. Next list of speakers, we have Bruce Campbell, Ted Cabral, Nicole Buckley Biggs, Michael Brodsky, and Judy Bramfman. Okay, do we have Bruce Campbell, Ted Cabral, Nicole Buckley Biggs, Michael Brodsky, and Judy Bramfman? And it looks like we have a phone caller here who you might be on the list. 7056. Are you on the list?
Yeah, I'm Bruce Campbell.
Great, Bruce, go ahead and provide your comment, please.
So I vehemently disagree that conserved lands must be actively managed, particularly old growth forests and larger wilderness areas. This is because both land management agencies and humans generally are untrustworthy, especially when they see big trees. Northwest California is an especially good place to acquire and protect land due to coast redwood forest carbon sequestration, Klamath-Siskiyou biodiversity, and lots of indigenous tribes and nations in the area. Also because Arcata Office BLM manages several national landscape conservation system lands, they do a good job and thus are more trustworthy to manage a parcel than is the Forest Service, CAL FIRE, and most other BLM regions who cannot be trusted to restrain from logging big trees under whatever excuse they use these days. Though if an area is acquired near Redwood National and State Parks, they do a decent job at management, but otherwise BLM would do a good job at managing Northwest California parcels. The low-hanging fruit on the state level greatly improved protections and management at Jackson Demonstration State Forest and at Soquel State Forest. On federal level, passed Senator Padilla's Public Lands Act partly to fend off damaging logging plans from the Los Padres National Forest and some salvage logging in August Fire Complex area. Also passed Feinstein Schiff's Rim of the Valley bill as well. And do not count timber company habitat conservation plan lands under California 30 by 30 unless they sell or otherwise guarantee protection for temporary set-aside areas for the marbled murrelet, and then only count the set-asides and possibly
Bruce,
certain riparian areas, even
Bruce,
if their wood is
I just have
FSC
to
certified.
remind you that you're out of time. Thank you very much for your comment.
Dang.
We have, let's see, Michael Brodsky. Michael, please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Thank you. I'm Michael Brodsky. I'm on the board of Santa Monica Airport to Park Foundation, dedicated to turning Santa Monica Airport into a park when it closes in 2028. And we know that California has a history of preserving space far from urban spaces. And urban spaces are particularly important for people who have limited access and mobility to park space. Plus, they help contribute to the biodiversity of our cities that are growing all the time. And the space in our cities is becoming more and more contested, with people needing biodiverse space and people needing housing. So we need to help this plan to facilitate zoning already in existing housing zoning areas, and to ensure that remaining land becomes conservation spaces so that cities can thrive into the future, not just for 30 years, but for 100 years and for 200 years. As population densities increase in the future, our parks will become more important than ever. Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you, Michael, for your comment. And Moises, it looks like we're able to get you to unmute. And if you're on the phone, yep, you have your hand raised. I'll go ahead and you're 7774. I'm going to ask you to unmute and provide your comment. Moises, are you able to? So it's *6 to unmute. There we go.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yay.
Thank you so much for your patience. My name is Moises Cisneros with the Sierra Club. Many thanks to the CNRA for creating this space, and to the panelists for delivering a robust report and powerful recommendations. The conservation of lands will provide us with a fighting chance to address the existential threat of climate change, while providing for our mental and physical well-being. Additionally, conservation can generate jobs and boost our economy. According to the California Outdoor Association, California's outdoor economy, which relies on pristine, wild, and scenic lands, clean water, and clear night skies, sustains 691,000 jobs and produces $6.2 billion in state and local revenue. This will help my communities in the inland desert regions and really throughout the state, for communities who rely heavily on tourism and the outdoor recreation sector to recover from the pandemic. The responsible conservation of our lands as a means to conserve our lives and biodiversity can, if done correctly, meaning there's enough funding, education, and advocacy for our habitat stewardship, can support many livelihoods and families in a sustainable way. We welcome continuing to work with business groups and private landowners to build on this premise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Moises. I'm glad we got you on there for your comment. Okay, we have a phone caller with a hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute *6 and see if you're on our list here. *6 to unmute, please. There we go. Are
Hi,
you
can
on
you
our
hear me?
list? Yes.
Yes, this
Can
is
you
Nicole
identify?
Buckley-Biggs.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I'm a PhD student at Stanford researching climate and conservation policy. I'd like to share 3 comments focused on the working lands aspects of 30 by 30. First, state investment in conserving working lands should be outcomes-based rather than practice-based. A binary concept of conserved versus not conserved is not appropriate to working lands, where the nature value of these lands lies on a gradient. So for this reason, specific ecological goals should be set rather than assigning which management practices landowners should use to achieve those goals, and progress measured over time. Second, following the carbon markets model, conservation success on working lands can only be measured through monitoring and third-party verification to ensure that outcomes are being achieved. This rigorous outcomes-based approach would also enable the creation of payments for ecosystem services programs that compensate landowners for providing those measured outcomes. Finally, leaders from the ag community need to be on the advisory panel. Farmers and ranchers can determine what practices are actually feasible for implementing at a scale that will make a difference for our stated conservation outcomes. So to summarize, I recommend that any definition of conservation on working lands be outcomes-based, that more rigor and third-party verification be required to allow for payments for ecosystem services, and that the producers and landowners who manage working lands in California play a central role in grounding this discussion in practicalities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for your comment. Do we have Ted Cabral or Judy Bramfman before we move on to our next speaker list? Okay, let's move on, team. Okay, we have Victoria Brandon, Susie Boyd, Jenny Binstock, Cindy Barrows, Reza Barrias. Anybody on the phone see their name or hear their name? Please *9 to raise your hand. So one more time, Victoria Brandon, Susie Boyd, Jenny Binstock, Cindy Barrows, and Reza Barrias. Okay. We have Jenny Binstock. I'm going to ask you to unmute and please provide your comment.
Hello, I made it. Thank you so much. Great to be with you all. I work for the Sierra Club as a public lands campaigner here in California. I really want to thank CNRA for their work to convene yet another meeting with us all, and to the panel for their presentation, as well as for their excellent report put out in advance of today. I really appreciate these thoughtful recommendations around how we need to understand and practice conservation in a way that is inclusive, holistic, and dynamic. And I'd just like to highlight a few key takeaways, as many others have here. So thanks for your patience. The first is the funding piece. I really appreciate that it's named that the success of 30 by 30 hinges on having adequate funding to make this a reality. And so we really hope that a portion of the 30 by 30 Pathways report will acknowledge how significant this need is and provide a vision for coordinated strategies over the life of this initiative that includes more information on needs and opportunities that we can all rally behind and work towards together. It's fantastic that echoed throughout the report is the importance of people to conservation efforts. We hope the Pathways report will outline a robust framework and strategies and name resources needed for leading the inclusive engagement partnerships and collaborations required to make this a success. And lastly, we just need a comprehensive evaluation of existing policies and practices that are actively undermining 30 by 30 goals. We can't achieve the proactive vision outlined in the panel's recommendations if we don't address the challenges within our existing policies and practices. So we hope the state's regulatory powers can be used to reduce or eliminate activities that threaten conservation as part of this process. Thank you so much. Sorry for going a bit over.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, I wanted you to finish your sentence. Okay, great. Cindy Barrows, welcome. Go ahead and provide your comments, Cindy.
Sí, muy buenas tardes. I will be providing my comments in Spanish, and I could also provide the translation if that's allowed.
Of course. Interpretation. Would you just like to go ahead and do it yourself then, Cindy?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Sure.
Thank you. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Cindy Hernández Orellana Barrows, con el Consejo de Federaciones Mexicanas en Coachella, la patria tradicional del pueblo cahuilla. Hay varios terrenos privados dentro de nuestros monumentos nacionales, áreas de preocupación ambiental crítica, áreas de conservación y áreas silvestres. Por lo tanto, aunque existen estas áreas protegidas dentro del Valle de Coachella, porciones significantes de nuestro desierto no están protegidas y continúan bajo amenaza debido a proyectos de desarrollo insostenible. La protección completa y el manejo adecuado de todas estas áreas son esenciales para el bienestar físico, mental y de nuestra comunidad y la supervivencia de nuestras especies endémicas y en peligro de extinción. También es necesario la restauración de las áreas como el Mar Saltón, ya que esto significaría un mejoramiento de la calidad del aire del Valle de Coachella, revitalizaría la economía local y mejorará la calidad de vida de los miembros de la comunidad que viven cerca y alrededor del Mar de Saltón. Le pedimos que considere el valor de la biodiversidad y la capacidad de absorber el carbono que ofrecen los desiertos de California e incluyan la conservación de las tierras desérticas en los esfuerzos de 30 por 30. Por último, me gustaría resaltar la importancia de la colaboración entre agencias indígenas, privadas, locales, estatales y federales para asegurar que la conservación de la tierra sea en perpetuidad. Gracias por su tiempo y por facilitar estas juntas. Good afternoon. My name is Cindy Hernández Orellana Barrows with the Council of Mexican Confederations in Coachella, the traditional homeland of the Cahuilla people. There are several private inholdings within our local national monuments, Areas of critical environmental concern, conservation, and wilderness areas. Therefore, while we have these protected areas in the Coachella Valley, significant portions of our desert are not conserved and continue to be under threat due to unsustainable development projects. Complete protection and adequate management of all these areas are essential to the physical and mental well-being of our community and for the survival of our endemic and endangered species. Restoration of areas such as the Salton Sea is also necessary. This will significantly improve the Coachella Valley's air quality, revitalize the local economy, and improve the quality of life for community members living near and around the Salton Sea. We ask that you please consider the biodiversity and carbon sequestration value of California's desert and include the conservation of desert lands in 30 by 30 efforts. Lastly, I would like to highlight the importance of collaboration between Indigenous, private, local, state, and federal agencies to ensure that the conservation of land is in perpetuity. Thank you very much for your time and for facilitating these meetings.
Thank you very much, Cindy, and thank you for interpreting as well. Let's see, our next speaker, do we have Victoria Brandon, Susie Boyd, or Reza Barrias here? And if you're on the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand. Okay, next list, please. I think we have about 10 speakers left on the list. We have Tim Bailey, Rebecca August, John Armstrong, Kimberly Anderson, and Ana Alvarez. Tim Bailey, Rebecca August, John Armstrong, Kimberly Anderson, and Ana Alvarez. And it's, okay, I see Kimberly. Kimberly, I'm going to ask you to unmute and provide your comment, please.
Hi, as a recent graduate from UC Davis in Sustainable Environmental Design, I just wanted to add to some of the earlier comments that based on the fact that most people are living in urban areas, the changes to land use and development in these areas can greatly promote this 30 by 30 plan. And the Wayne issue that I want to encourage is the investment and incentivizing green infrastructure, especially for stormwater controls, as it promotes biodiversity and wildlife corridors, adds green space and flood control, as well as reducing non-point source pollution to our waterways. And in addition, as others have mentioned, green spaces reduce urban heat island effects and improve human health, as well as sequestering CO2 and many other benefits. So I'd like to see some promotion of these multi-use benefit programs to be included in the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly, for your comment. We have Dr. Ana M. Alvarez. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and speak.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Dr. Ana Alvarez, Deputy General Manager of the East Bay Regional Park District. As the nation's largest local park agency, we are poised and ready to partner with you in considering and implementing strategies in support of 30 by 30. Equally important, we want to ensure that the new conserved lands as a result of 30 by 30 are not simply set aside, but are also rehabilitated, restored, and enhanced so that they can provide maximum ecological resiliency in a changing climate. I also would like to express my appreciation for taking a bold step forward towards a new conservation model that is responsive to today's challenges, to today's communities in a more inclusive manner. Conservation today demands a multidimensional systems approach to the intersectionality of equity, social justice, health, the front lines of climate change impacts, local and regional economies, and certainly protecting our natural world. This new conservation model integrates multiple benefits, such as refugia habitat, groundwater recharge, carbon sequestration, and green workforce development, all while centering equity at its very core. In closing, for public land agencies to be effective in not only conserving lands, but also rehabilitating and managing these lands, state and federal funding must be made available as a true investment to support California's natural infrastructure for a more sustainable and less apocalyptic future. I urge you to make sure that public land agencies are properly resourced in order to advance 30 by 30 strategies at the regional and local level, where the greatest impact can be achieved and where it matters most. Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Dr. Alvarez. Okay, so we have, let's check in, see if Tim Bailey, Rebecca August, John Armstrong are in our participants, our audience. *9 if you're on the phone to raise your hand. Okay. Next list, please. Oh, that was the end of our registered speakers. And so I think, Jen, we're okay to go to 7. Okay, we're gonna see if we have any speakers who are have not registered who would like to provide a comment now. We are going to take some comments until 7 p.m. So if you have a comment now and you're not registered, we will take your comment. And if you're on the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand. Okay. Okay, it looks like we don't have any more comments. Oh, here we go. We have Michelle Berditschewski. Sorry, I may have butchered your name there. Michelle, go ahead and unmute and provide your comment, please.
Thank you. I really appreciate this effort. The 30 by 30 initiative is very exciting that it's happening on this high level. And I want to put in a word for federal state partnerships in protecting large landscapes, such as the Medicine Lake Highlands and Mount Shasta here in Northern California, which are extremely important for California's water supply, for climate stability, for drought, as drought buffers. And I just want to put that word in because the state tends to stay out of the federal input, especially on forest plans and issues such as industrial development that can harm these areas, as has been the case with the Medicine Lake Highlands. And so I just want to put in that word and 20 seconds early. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Michelle, for your comment. Do we have any more comments from our audience? We still have a good number of you still here with us. Okay. With that, we're going to close our meeting. I just have a few reminders for you. Thank you all for participating today and providing such thoughtful comments. A meeting summary will be prepared and will include all of the input that you provided today. And it will be posted on the project website and shared with you all. You will also receive a post-meeting survey so that you can provide us feedback on the workshop, anything that we did well, anything that we need to improve on. And then just a reminder, we have our last topical advisory workshop next Tuesday, August 17th, and the topic is conservation of coastal waters. And again, thank you again for your participation. I'm going to turn it over to Jen for closing comments. Jen.
Thank you, Cece. Thank you so much to the amazing panel. Great job, facilitators. Thank you to the translators. Special shout out to you, Cindy, for helping us out. And I just want to say thank you to the public, the members of the public that commented today. I am endlessly inspired by your passion and your enthusiasm for conservation and your willingness to work with us on this important project. It always ends my day on a happy note. So I look forward to seeing you all next week when we talk about coast and oceans conservation. And I look forward to seeing your thoughts on our draft document as it comes out in the fall. We're definitely taking your thoughts into consideration. Really appreciate your engagement, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thanks again to everyone. Good night.